I was running long-haul deliveries between Laredo and Corpus Christi when I first heard about the woman on FM 666. Truckers swap stories at the truck stops around Mathis. Half joking and half serious, but this one had a different weight. The way they spoke about her, lowering their voices, chewing slower, eyes fixed on the cracked countertop, made me pay attention. They said she wasn't like your usual hitchhiker. She never asked for a ride. She never even moved her lips. All she did was raise one pale arm and point, always at the back seat before vanishing into the brush that pressed against the road. Some swore she was a ghost from a wreck years back. Others said she was something older, something that wasn't ever human. I didn't put much stock in it, but the way the stories clung to that stretch of road stuck with me. The night I saw her, I'd been pushing my hours longer than I should have. I'd taken a load of livestock feed east and was heading back empty, thinking I'd make San Antonio before dawn. FM 666 cuts north from Matis like a crooked scar, mostly blacktop lined with mesquite and barbed wire fences that go on for miles. It's the kind of road you drive once and never forget. The air out there is heavy, dry, the kind that smells of dust and old brush fires. My cab reeked of stale coffee and sweat, but I kept the windows down anyway, letting the night air push against me, keeping me awake. The radio had gone to static miles back, so it was just the hum of the diesel engine and the whine of tires against the pavement. I rounded a bend near an old windmill and saw her standing by the ditch. She was too pale to miss, like a strip of bone laid out under the stars. Her dress looked old, not vintage like something from a thrift store, but genuinely old, fraying at the hem, gray-white in the headlights. Her hair hung in damp strands and she held her arm out at me, not waving but steady, her finger pointing at the passenger side rear of my cab. I don't know why I slowed, but my foot pressed the brake almost without me thinking. For half a second, I swear her eyes caught mine, and they were blacker than the night around us. I blinked and she was gone. Not walked away, not hidden. Just gone. The smart thing would have been to gun it, get back to the highway and not look back. But curiosity and tiredness do bad things to a man. I coasted to a stop, heart pounding, headlights bleaching the brush. I leaned over and checked the sleeper and back. Empty, of course. I laughed out loud, a shaky sound in the silence, and told myself I was just worn out. Still, as I put the rig back in gear and pulled away, the rear-view mirror seemed darker than it should have been, like the shadows weren't following the same rules as the rest of the night. The next time was worse. About a month later, different run, same stretch. This time I saw her farther down, past the old cattle guard where the road narrows. She didn't move until I was almost on top of her. Then her arm snapped up and she pointed. Same place, backseat of my cab. My blood ran cold. I pressed harder on the wheel, knuckles white, telling myself not to look in the mirror. But I did. God help me, I did. And there was something back there. Not a full shape, not a person I could describe, but a darker dark. A knot of shadow that seemed to breathe. I jerked my eyes forward, heart hammering. When I looked again, the mirror was clear. My palms were slick with sweat, and the smell in the cab had changed, sour like wet soil. I tried not to run that road anymore, but dispatch has no patience for ghost stories. They send you where the loads are. The third time I wasn't alone. I had another driver, Benny, riding shotgun because his rig was down. He'd heard the stories too, and we were halfway laughing about them when she showed up. Same pale figure in the ditch, same arm pointing. Benny cursed and craned around to look. Don't, I told him, gripping the wheel tight. He asked what the hell she was pointing at, and before I could stop him, he leaned back and pulled the curtain to peek into the sleeper. He went pale. Didn't say a word, just shut it again and sat there stiff as a board. I asked him what he saw, but he wouldn't answer. Not that night, not ever. A week later, Benny quit driving. He told people it was his back giving him trouble, but I knew better. The way he looked at me after that, like I'd dragged him into something he couldn't shake, said enough. By then, I'd stopped pretending it was a trick of the headlights or my imagination. I started carrying a little wooden cross my mama gave me years ago, the kind you pin above a doorway. I nailed it into the cab right above the sleeper. For a while, it worked. I saw her once or twice more, but she never pointed when the cross was there. She just stood and watched as I passed, her eyes tracking me. I thought I'd beaten it, maybe even driven her off. But crosses don't always hold in a place like that. FM 666 is older than any church, older than any name we've given it. The last time I ran that stretch, the cross was gone. Just gone, nails and all. I didn't notice until I was miles in. deep into the emptiness where there's no turning back. My stomach dropped the moment I saw the empty space above the sleeper. That's when the lights in the cab dimmed, just for a second, like something was draining power. I gripped the wheel and prayed under my breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught her standing right by the shoulder, closer than ever. Her arm lifted, slow as death, finger steady. This time I didn't look back, not once. I pressed the accelerator and barreled through the dark, every nerve in me screaming. I don't remember much of the next 10 miles except the sound of my own breathing and the rattle of the engine straining. When I finally hit the highway, the relief almost made me cry. I pulled into the nearest truck stop, hands trembling so bad I could barely hold my thermos. I swore I wouldn't take that road again. I meant it too. But sometimes when I'm dead tired and the dispatcher routes me wrong, I find myself near Mathis again. And every time I pass the turnoff for FM 666, I see the brush shift just slightly, like something pale is standing there, waiting for me to come back. Some of the other drivers say she's nothing more than a ghost from an old crash. Some woman who lost her life when her car rolled into a ditch, but I don't believe that anymore. Whatever she isn't just a soul stuck in limbo. She's older, colder, and she doesn't want a ride. She wants you to look back just once too often until you see what she's pointing at, and then you'll understand why truckers whisper about her instead of telling the full story. Some roads you can drive for decades without trouble. Others, like FM 666, are waiting for you to slip, waiting for you to look where you shouldn't. And once you do, you'll never drive alone again. Highway 83 is one of those roads that feels endless. It cuts through Zapata like a scar, running north and south until the scrubland swallows it. On summer nights, the air is heavy, the heat not letting go even at midnight, and the road hums under your tires as if it's alive. I was driving back from Laredo late one Friday after dropping off a load for my uncle's business. Nothing unusual about the trip except the hour. It was close to 1 a.m. when I saw him. The kid was standing on the shoulder with his thumb out, a skinny shape under a pale yellow street lamp that looked almost burnt out. He couldn't have been older than 19 or 20, maybe college age, maybe younger. Black hair falling across his forehead, denim jacket even though it had to be pushing 90 degrees, and a duffel bag slung across one shoulder. At first I passed him by, but the guilt worked quick. My dad used to pick up hitchhikers all the time, back when people trusted each other a little more. So I slowed, checked the rear view, and pulled over onto the gravel. He jogged up to the passenger side and leaned in, flashing me a smile that didn't look forced, didn't look menacing. "Appreciate it," he said, voice smooth but quiet. "Just trying to get up the road a ways." I nodded, unlocked the door, and he climbed in. The car dipped under his weight like normal, but something felt a little off. The smell hit me first, like damp clothes after being left in a plastic bag too long, mixed with the faint copper tang of blood. I brushed it off as sweat and travel. We drove in silence for a while. He looked out the window, fingers drumming lightly against his thighs, the duffel bag tucked at his feet. Every now and then he'd glance at me and smile again, polite, almost grateful. His voice was soft when he finally spoke. "Not many folks stop anymore. You're the first car that even slowed down." "Most people are scared," I said, forcing a chuckle. "You never know who you're picking up out here." His eyes flicked toward me then, brown and darker than they should have been, almost black. "You're not scared, though." The way he said it made my chest tighten. It wasn't a question. I tried to brush it off. "Guess not." He laughed under his breath and looked back out the window. I noticed then the way his body seemed to rest strangely in the seat. His shoulders pressed against the back. His hands sat easy on his thighs, but his legs didn't quite bend right. My eyes shifted down for just a second, casual as if checking the speedometer, but I caught it. His jeans ended at the knees, and from there down was nothing but air. He wasn't sitting on the seat. He was hovering. My stomach turned cold and I gripped the wheel tighter to keep from jerking the car. The floor mat beneath him looked untouched, clean compared to the dirt scuffed in on my boots. I forced my eyes back to the road. Maybe I was tired, maybe it was the dark, maybe I'd imagined it. But the longer we drove, the clearer it became. He had no feet. I told myself not to panic, not to show anything on my face. The boy, if he was a boy, kept humming softly under his breath. Something old, maybe a hymn, maybe a lullaby. The hair on my arms rose with every note. "You live around here?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He nodded slowly. "Used to, south of town. Haven't been back in a long time. What brought you out tonight?" His lips curled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes this time. "I just needed a ride. People always go north or south, I can't walk it." I thought about that word, walk, and my hands slicked with sweat on the wheel. The miles ticked by slow. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to end it without making him angry. Every horror story I'd ever heard about picking up the wrong person came back all at once, but he didn't seem violent. Just there, heavy as a shadow. Finally, he leaned back and sighed. "You can let me off up here?" I didn't argue. I pulled onto the shoulder near a cluster of mesquite trees and put the car in park. My pulse was in my throat. He opened the door, slung the duffel bag back over his shoulder, and climbed out. For 1 second, in the glow of my headlights, I saw him from head to toe, the jeans still cut off at the knees. Below that, nothing. No legs, no shadow on the dirt. "Thanks," he said and shut the door gently. Then he walked, floated, off the shoulder and down into the brush. I sat there with the engine idling until I couldn't see him anymore. Then I drove, faster than I should have, not daring to look back. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion had played tricks on me. But I turned back onto Highway 83 and slowed near the spot I'd dropped him. The gravel shoulder was bare, except for one thing. A pair of old torn sneakers sat side by side, laces undone as if someone had stepped out of them and never come back. I didn't stop. I didn't take them. I just pressed the gas and drove north, swearing I'd never pick up another hitchhiker again. But sometimes when I'm out late on that stretch near Zapata, I see him again. Thumb out, denim jacket catching the faint yellow glow of the street lamp, duffel slung over his shoulder, waiting for someone else to give him a ride he doesn't need. And when I pass, I swear I can hear the hum of that lullaby trailing behind me, just a second too late, as though it's coming from the back seat. Highway 83 runs like a scar along the Rio Grande, and if you've driven it at night near Zapata, you know how empty it feels. How the scrubland presses close and the air carries the weight of something you can't quite name. I was heading south out of Laredo late one evening. The kind of drive you make when you're restless and the miles are easier than the silence at home. The radio picked up only static and the occasional ranchera from across the border, and the road stretched dark ahead of me, unspooling without promise. That's when I saw him, a young man standing on the shoulder with his thumb out, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked too clean to be out there, like he'd stepped out of a college dorm instead of the thorn-choked mesquite flats. His hair was neatly combed and his face held a calmness that didn't belong in a hitchhiker. I slowed down before I even realized it, the instinct to help outweighing the warnings that rose like distant thunder in my head. He climbed in without hesitation, nodding in thanks but saying nothing at first. The dome light caught his face, pale in that flickering way old bulbs sometimes cast, and for a moment I thought I saw his features blur, like a heat shimmer rising off asphalt in summer. Then he shut the door and the night pressed back in. We rode in silence for a mile or two, my headlights carving the dark. Finally, I asked where he was headed, and his voice came soft, measured, with a faint drawl that placed him from somewhere nearby. "Just down the road," he said. And it was the kind of answer that offered no real place at all. When he shifted in his seat, adjusting the backpack on his lap, my eyes flicked down and that's when I saw it. He wasn't resting his boots on the mat like any passenger would. He wasn't resting them anywhere. From the knees down, there was nothing. He floated inches above the floorboards, trousers hanging loose where legs should have been. My first thought was that my tired mind was playing tricks, that shadows inside the cab distorted things. I forced myself to glance again, and the sight locked my breath. His pants legs ended in empty air, no stumps, no shoes, just a fading into nothingness that wavered like smoke. I gripped the wheel tighter, the leather slick under my palms. He must have noticed the way my knuckles whitened because he turned his head toward me then, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes. Not threatening, not pleading, but something between sorrow and warning. The hum of the tires seemed louder, the engine a heartbeat too fast. I wanted to tell him to get out, to fling the door open and let him vanish into the mesquite, but my tongue felt heavy, my mouth dry as bone. The miles crawled. He asked if I believed in accidents in roads that never let you leave. His words weren't questions so much as statements, drifting like smoke in the cab. He told me he'd been walking a long time, longer than anyone could count. Always along this stretch of 83. He never said why, but the way he pressed his hand to his backpack made me wonder what he carried. What tethered him here? At one point he asked me to pull over by a cluster of mesquites where the shadows nodded deep. I slowed, gravel crunching under the tires as I eased onto the shoulder, the desert silence pressing thick around us. He opened the door, but before he stepped out, he looked back at me, eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. "Keep driving," he whispered, "and don't stop if you see me again." The door shut soft as a sigh, and when I leaned across to watch him step into the brush, there was nothing. No figure, no backpack, not even a shifting of branches, just empty roadside scrub and the faint rustle of wind. I sat there a long minute listening, the cicadas silent, the night too still. Finally, I pulled back onto the highway, my headlights cutting across the void, but my chest felt tight, my hands trembling against the wheel. I drove all the way to Zapata without touching the brakes, the yellow lines blurring into one long ribbon of dread. At the gas station on the edge of town, I climbed out to clear my head, and when I glanced down at the passenger side mat, the dust lay undisturbed, no scuffs, no sign anyone had been there. Only one faint smear, like the print of bare toes dragged through sand, but it didn't sink into the mat. It floated above it, a shadow of a mark that vanished when I blinked. That was years ago, but I've never driven Highway 83 at night since. People in Zapata say there's a boy who waits along the shoulder, and those who stop for him don't always come back the same. Some return pale, shaken, swearing they'll never pick up another soul. Others don't return at all. Their cars found empty a few miles down the road, engines still warm, doors ajar, headlights cutting into the scrub as if they were waiting for something. I think about his last words often, the way they lingered like smoke inside my skull. I know I'll see him again one night standing in the glow of my headlights, thumb raised, eyes fixed on me. And if I ever forget myself enough to pull over, I know I won't be alone in the car when the road stretches on without end. Highway 83 south of Laredo has a strange kind of quiet at night. The brush swallows sound, and the border air clings to you with the smell of mesquite and stagnant water from Falcon Lake. I had been running that stretch of road for years, mostly driving between San Antonio and Zapata to check on some drilling sites. By then I knew the curves, the mile markers, the small gas stations that closed before midnight. But nothing prepares you for seeing a figure on the shoulder, especially when you know damn well you haven't passed a town for miles. I saw him just outside Zapata, a young man in jeans and a white shirt, hand up, thumb out. He had that restless stance, shifting on his feet, like he'd been standing out there a long time. It was near 1 in the morning, and there wasn't a headlight behind me, so against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled to the shoulder. He didn't hesitate. He opened the passenger door and climbed in without a word. Just gave me a quick nod, eyes dark and tired, face almost too pale under the dome light. I told him to buckle up, but he only shifted, leaning against the seat like he'd been carrying something heavy. That's when I noticed it, the way his legs didn't settle right. His jeans ended where his shins should have been, but there were no boots, no feet. He was hovering a few inches above the floorboards, and the shadows under him were wrong, as if the light bent around his absence. My stomach dropped, and for a second I wanted to slam the brakes and throw myself out of my own truck, but his eyes locked on me. "Just to the bridge," he said quietly. His voice was steady, almost tired, like he'd said those same words 100 times before. I drove on, the cab colder than before, watching the road but stealing glances at him. He never looked ahead. He kept turning his head toward the back seat like something was there or should have been. By the time we hit the Zapata bridge, I glanced over and he was gone. The seatbelt still stretched across the empty seat. The door never opened. I didn't drive Highway 83 alone at night for a long time after that, but I still hear stories from truckers and locals. They all describe him the same way, young, pale, polite, hovering above the floorboards, always asking to be taken to the bridge. Highway 90 between Del Rio and Uvalde is lonelier than most folks realize, and when you're out there past midnight, the dark feels thick enough to push back against your headlights. A couple years back, driving home late from a job near Brackettville, I was running low on gas and panicking. My gauge was in the red, and I hadn't seen an open station in hours. Then, out of nowhere, I spotted it. Bright canopy lights glowing like daylight, pumps lined up clean and shining, and a little convenience store with a neon sign flickering, "Open." I pulled in relieved, heart pounding with gratitude. The place looked fresh painted, attendants in crisp blue shirts moving around, smiling, waving me in. They filled my tank, wiped my windshield, even offered me a cold soda for free. I remember one of them, a tall man with thick black hair, patting the hood of my car and saying, "Do, safe road ahead. Don't stop again tonight." I paid cash, they thanked me, and I drove on. When I told the story the next day in Uvalde, folks looked at me like I'd lost it. There hadn't been a station on that stretch for years. I drove back out that afternoon to prove it. The ground where I'd pulled in was nothing but scrub and mesquite, dirt rutted with old tire tracks, no lights, no pumps, no store. Just heat shimmer and buzzards overhead. I checked my tank, thinking maybe exhaustion had played tricks on me, but it was still full, the needle pinned right. I never saw those attendants again, but sometimes on clear nights I pass that same patch and swear I see a glow ahead, faint but inviting, like the ghost of a gas station waiting to welcome the desperate. They say the land remembers what it wants, and sometimes it gives it back to you for a price you won't recognize until much later. Highway 83 south of Laredo is a lonely road at night, the kind of stretch where the glow of your headlights feels swallowed by the brush on either side, where the radio crackles and fades, and every few miles you pass a dim porch light or the skeletal remains of an old roadside business. I had been driving that road late one summer night after visiting family in Laredo, heading back toward Zapata, where the black ribbon of asphalt curves along the Rio Grande. The air was heavy with heat even at midnight, the kind that sticks to your skin and turns the car into a slow cooker if you dare to roll the windows down. I was fighting fatigue, the hypnotic rhythm of the stripes flashing beneath my tires. When I saw him, he was standing on the shoulder, thumb out, backpack slung over one shoulder, dressed in a worn denim jacket and jeans that looked a little too clean for a man hitching rides that late. His face was pale in the beams of my headlights, young, maybe 20 at most, with hair that caught a glint of silver in the light. Against my better judgment, I slowed down. I had grown up hearing warnings about picking up strangers on these highways, but there was something about him, something that made me think of my own younger brother, stranded once outside of Hebronville. So I pulled over and he climbed in without a word, just a faint nod of thanks. He smelled faintly of river water, that muddy sweetness of the Rio Grande, and when he settled into the seat, I noticed how stiffly he moved, as though he hadn't ridden in a car in a long while. We rode in silence for several minutes, the hum of the tires and the faint buzz of the dashboard lights the only sounds. Finally, I asked him where he was headed. He said Zapata, voice low, carrying a strange echo that made me glance sideways at him. His lips moved with the words, but I swear the sound reached my ears a fraction later than it should have. I told myself it was exhaustion. It wasn't until he shifted in the seat, angling his body toward the window, that I noticed what was wrong. His jeans hung loose at the ankles, but the cuffs didn't rest on my floorboard. They hovered just above it, swaying slightly as if stirred by a breeze I couldn't feel. My hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself it was shadows, tricks of the passing lights, the exhaustion making me see what wasn't there. But then he adjusted again and I saw it clear as day. The hem of his pants floated, the outline of his feet simply not there. My heart jackhammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stare at the road. He asked me then if I had ever lost anyone on this highway. The way he phrased it froze me more than the question itself. Not had I ever known someone who died, but had I lost someone? I swallowed hard and said no, though my uncle had wrecked near Roma years before. The boy turned his head, and though the side of his face was calm, his eyes reflected the red glow of my taillights in the mirrors like an animal's. My mouth went dry. I wanted to pull over, let him out, but the highway stretched dark and empty, and I couldn't bring myself to stop. We passed the turnoff toward San Ignacio, and he spoke again, telling me in a flat tone about the water, how sometimes it swallows men whole. I thought of the Rio Grande at night, black and endless, full of currents that dragged people under. His words carried weight, like he wasn't reciting a story but reliving it. My skin prickled and every instinct told me to keep driving, faster and faster until I reached town. But when I finally dared to glance at the passenger seat again, it was empty. The faint smell of river mud lingered, but the boy was gone. The seatbelt still hung loose, unbuckled, the air cool where he had been. I didn't stop. I didn't even breathe until I pulled into a lit gas station in Zapata, heart hammering so hard it hurt. That was 3 summers ago, and I swore I'd never drive alone on that stretch again at night. But last winter I found myself on another road, farther north near Hondo. I had been at a buddy's place late playing cards, and by the time I headed out it was past midnight. Ranch Road 173 cuts through scrub and farmland, lonely stretches where your headlights only catch mesquite and the occasional fence post. My buddy had warned me to avoid the 1-lane bridge just past the creek, told me locals avoided it after dark. I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. The air was sharp with cold, frost forming on the edges of the windshield. When I reached the bridge, I slowed, the boards clattering under my tires. The creek below glimmered faintly, a sluggish ribbon in the dark. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was the groan of the wood, the settling of the structure under the weight of my truck. But then it grew sharper, higher, like a man screaming, not one but several voices tangled together in a raw chorus of agony. My hands froze on the wheel. The sound rose from beneath the bridge as if the water itself was filled with the dying. I wanted to hit the gas, but something held me still. The voices rose and fell, echoing against the banks, some deep and guttural, others shrill, all twisting together in a sound that made my stomach lurch. I forced myself forward, tires clattering across the boards until I reached the far side. The screams faded, but not completely. They lingered like the echo of a nightmare you can't shake. I stopped at the first pull-off and stumbled out, my breath steaming in the cold. The night was still, no wind, no frogs, no crickets, just silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. I swore I heard footsteps behind me, just a beat off from my own, but when I spun around, the road was empty. Later, when I told my buddy, he just shook his head and said some things don't belong to us anymore. He said back in the 50s, a prison work crew drowned in that creek when their transport crashed through the bridge. Shackled together, they went down screaming. And some folks say the water keeps their voices. Others claim the bridge itself remembers. I don't know which chills me worse, the idea of spirits trapped in the current or wood that has learned to scream. I haven't driven that way since. Between the hitchhiker on Highway 83 and the screams under the bridge on FM 173, I've learned there are roads in Texas best left alone after midnight. Because sometimes the dark doesn't just hide things, sometimes it carries them with it, waiting for you to drive by so it can remind you how thin the line is between the living and the lost. Highway 83 runs through a long, empty stretch near Zapata, where the brush seems to close in on the road at night, mesquite trees crowding the shoulders, their shadows twisting like dark fingers under the moonlight. I had been driving south toward town after visiting my cousin in Laredo, the kind of late-night haul where the hum of the tires and the endless white lines make your eyes blur. It was close to midnight when I saw him, a young man standing at the shoulder, thumb out, face pale in the glow of my headlights. He looked ordinary enough at first glance, jeans, a faded shirt, hair matted with sweat, maybe in his 20s. Something about the way he stood there made me slow down. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, but the highway was empty, and it felt wrong to leave him standing in the dark like that. I pulled over, leaned across, and pushed open the passenger door. He climbed in without a word, nodding his thanks. He smelled faintly of dust and sweat, nothing unusual. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft, like he hadn't used it much lately. Headed to Zapata? I told him I was. He said, "That's good," and fell quiet again. We drove on, the truck rattling as the speedometer hovered around 60. I tried to make conversation, asked if he lived around there, if he had family waiting. He only nodded, eyes fixed on the windshield, not looking at me. His silence was thick, uncomfortable. I figured he was tired, maybe drunk, maybe in trouble. I almost regretted stopping. Then he shifted in the seat. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks in the dim glow from the dash. His legs weren't bent like they should be. His boots weren't resting on the floorboard at all. They hung a few inches above the rubber mat, his jeans limp at the bottom where the ankles should press against the floor. My stomach lurched, my hands tightening on the wheel. I glanced again, trying not to be obvious. His whole body sat solid on the seat, but his feet, there were no feet. Just the frayed ends of denim floating above the floor. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. The air inside the cab had grown colder, though the night outside was warm, sticky with humidity. My throat was tight, and for a long stretch I didn't dare say anything. I kept driving, headlights cutting through the brush and the curve of the road ahead. The sound of the engine suddenly too loud in my ears. When I finally forced myself to speak, my voice came out hoarse. "You all right, man?" He turned slowly, his eyes catching the reflection of the dashboard lights. They were dark, almost black, with no light inside them. "Almost there," he said, and his mouth didn't quite move right with the words. They felt like an echo in the truck, like they came from the cab itself. I gripped the wheel harder, palms slick. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to pull over to stop and shove him out, but some stubborn fear held me in place. Something told me if I acknowledged what I was seeing too much, it would only get worse. We drove another few miles in silence. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, every breath harder to take. I swear the smell of dust had shifted, turning sour, like wet earth that had been dug up from deep below. He shifted again, and out of the corner of my eye I saw more than his missing feet. His shape was blurring like smoke caught in the cab, his shoulders fading in and out of the seat fabric. I blinked hard, sweat rolling down my face, and when I looked again, he was gone. Just gone. The seat was empty, the door shut tight. The truck shuddered once like a gust of wind had hit it, though the night outside was still. I pulled over, chest heaving, headlights spilling across the brush and dirt. My hands shook so bad I could barely light the cigarette I dug from the pack. I sat there staring at the empty seat, listening to the cicadas scream in the dark. When I finally started the truck again, I drove straight through to Zapata, not daring to glance at the passenger side. I parked outside my cousin's house, engine still running, too afraid to step out until the first rooster calls cracked the dawn. I never told him what I saw. Folks around here whisper stories about Highway 83, about soldiers lost in the brush, about accidents where no bodies were recovered. I don't know which one that boy belonged to, and I don't want to. But sometimes when I drive that stretch alone, I catch the smell of dust and sweat, and the seatbelt on the passenger side tugs like someone just buckled in. I thought that was the end of it, until a week later when I was driving north along Highway 281, a stretch I've taken countless times between Alice and George West. It was late again, because I can't seem to learn, and the highway was nearly empty. I was tired, windows down, letting the night air keep me awake. Then I saw headlights in the rear view. A rust-red Ford pickup, older model, maybe 70s or 80s, grille dented, paint dulled by years of sun. It came up fast, too fast, until it was tailgating me close enough that its high beams filled the cab, blinding me in the mirror. I swore, tapped the brakes to warn him, but he didn't back off. He stuck to me too close for mile after mile. My knuckles were white on the wheel. I sped up, he sped up. I slowed down, he slowed down. The bastard was playing with me. After 10 miles of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled onto the shoulder, gravel spitting out from under the tires. The Ford followed, stopping 20 yards behind. I climbed out, angry more than afraid, ready to chew out some drunk fool. But as I started walking toward it, the hair on my arms rose. The cab was empty. No one sat behind the wheel. The engine idled, headlights bright, grille rattling with the hum. My throat went dry. I called out, though my voice cracked. Nothing answered. I took another step closer. That's when the engine cut off with a sharp cough and the lights blinked out. Just darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing in, the kind you can feel in your teeth. I backed away, slow, until I reached my truck. I fumbled with the handle, slid in, locked the doors. When I turned the key, my engine sputtered like it didn't want to catch, like something was choking it. Finally, it roared back to life. I didn't look behind me when I pulled onto the road again. My headlights stretched down the blacktop, but nothing followed. No Ford, no lights, just the endless stretch of Highway 281. To this day, I can't drive either road without feeling watched. On 83, I keep my eyes fixed forward, never pulling over, no matter who I see. On 281, I check the rear view too often, bracing for those headlights. Folks around Zapata say some people you pick up on the road were never meant to get where they were going. And some trucks, well, they drive themselves long after the drivers are gone. Highway 83 near Zapata runs straight and lonely through the dark flats of South Texas. and on certain nights the road seems to breathe with its own kind of menace. I had been driving it since my early 20s, back when my uncle used to haul produce from Laredo to Corpus and I'd ride shotgun with him. But I never saw what I saw that September night until I was well into my 40s. The air was hot even though the sun had been down for hours. The kind of humid heat that sticks to your neck and makes your shirt cling to your chest. I was heading back toward Carrizo Springs after a late job, my truck rattling over the blacktop, when I noticed the figure on the shoulder just past a faded green mile marker. Thumb pointed skyward, head bowed like he was ashamed to even ask for help. I slowed down before I realized it. Old habits, maybe? Or maybe it was the way he looked, not wild or drunk like most hitchhikers I'd seen, but neat, almost careful, as if he had been waiting specifically for me. I rolled to a stop and leaned across the seat to push the passenger door open. He climbed in without a word. Slim kid, maybe 22, wearing faded jeans and a white t-shirt too clean for a man stuck walking the highway. His dark hair was matted from sweat, eyes sunken and ringed like he hadn't slept in days. He said thank you in a voice so low I barely caught it, and I hit the gas again. For a few miles we rode in silence. The dashboard light gave him a pale glow, and I noticed he wasn't carrying a bag, not even a bottle of water, which struck me as odd in that kind of weather. I asked him where he was headed. He said, just north, wherever you can drop me. That was all. Nothing about family, nothing about work. The way he said it made my skin prickle, like the words had been practiced. I didn't look at him again until I caught movement in the corner of my eye. He shifted in his seat, and that's when I saw it. His jeans ended neatly at the thigh, and below that there was nothing. No boots, no bare feet, just air. He sat a few inches above the floorboard, legs cut off like a bad trick photo. My throat closed up, and for a second I thought maybe I'd gone lightheaded from the heat. I gripped the wheel, kept my eyes forward, pretended not to see. He didn't notice my stare, or maybe he didn't care. He looked out the window at the mesquite and the power lines flicking by, and in that dim reflection of the glass I swear I saw not one face, but two, his own and another, older, lined with scars. I wanted to pull over, throw the door open, and let him slide back into the dark, but something in me knew better. If I stopped, if I kicked him out, he might turn that hollow gaze directly on me. The miles stretched thin. He finally spoke again, asking if I ever drove Old Bastrop Road outside of Austin. The question felt like ice water down my back. I'd been there once, years ago, on a delivery run, and I remembered the fog so thick you couldn't see past the hood. I told him I knew of it, but not well. He smiled faintly, and it wasn't the smile of a young man. It was weary, knowing, as though he'd walked that road 1,000 nights. He said, "There's a lantern that swings there. If you follow it, you never leave. You just circle until you give up." Then he leaned closer and whispered, "I've been following it a long time." I glanced at the clock. Only 10 minutes had passed since I picked him up, but it felt like hours. The air in the cab was heavy, pressing against my lungs. The highway stretched ahead in an endless ribbon, but I could swear I kept passing the same signs, the same crooked fence, the same dirt driveway leading off into the brush, like I was circling, not driving straight. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel. When I dared look at him again, the seat beside me was empty, though the indentation of his weight still bent the vinyl. I pressed the accelerator hard, engine whining until the mile markers began to change, until I felt the spell of repetition break. By the time I reached the next gas station, my shirt was plastered with sweat and my hands shook so badly I dropped my wallet on the counter trying to pay. The clerk looked at me funny when I asked how far it was back to Zapata. He said 30 miles. I should have only driven 5. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection of his face, or maybe the other one, staring at me through the glass. I remembered his whisper, the words about the lantern, about following it too long. For weeks I avoided the highways after dark. When I finally braved the drive again, I saw nothing. No hitchhiker, no missing feet, just empty road. But sometimes, late at night when the fog drifts across the mesquite, I catch the shimmer of a lantern bobbing ahead in the distance, and I take the first turnoff I can, because deep down I know if I keep following, I'll circle back and find him waiting for me. Thumb raised, face half in shadow, asking again for a ride that never ends, and when I do, I know I won't have the strength to pass him by. Highway 83 south of Laredo has always been a long, empty stretch of pavement, bordered by mesquite scrub, oil field roads, and the occasional weather-worn gas station that closes before midnight. Anyone who's driven it after dark knows the silence that settles over the land. A silence broken only by the hum of tires and the occasional flash of headlights from a semi pushing through the night. I'd driven it 100 times before, heading down toward Zapata where my uncle had a trailer near Falcon Lake. But it was one night in late September when I made the mistake that I still wake up thinking about. The kind of mistake you convince yourself you'd never make right up until you do. I picked up a hitchhiker. He was standing just beyond a curve where the brush broke enough for the moonlight to cut across him. He looked young, maybe 19, 20 at most, with a mop of black hair and a denim jacket that looked a little too heavy for the humid night. He wasn't frantic or waving, just standing with his thumb out like he'd been waiting a long time. I slowed almost without thinking. Something about being out there alone, a little restless from the monotony of the drive, made me feel almost guilty leaving him behind. So I braked, the gravel crunching under my tires as I pulled to the shoulder. He opened the passenger door and slid in without a word. That was the first odd thing. Most folks at least offer a thanks. He just nodded, face pale in the glow of the dashboard. "Headed to Zapata?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded again, then finally said, "Yeah, just south of there." His voice was soft, almost too soft for the rumble of the road. He smelled faintly of wet earth like a riverbank after a flood. I thought maybe he'd been walking for hours, maybe slept near the water. Nothing about him seemed threatening, just quiet. But as I drove, I realized he sat a little strangely in the seat, hands folded in his lap, legs at an angle. When the next green highway sign passed, I glanced down and noticed my stomach tighten. His boots weren't resting on the floorboard. They weren't resting on anything at all. He was hovering, maybe 3 inches above the carpet. My hands locked on the wheel, but I kept driving, telling myself the shadows were playing tricks. But then he shifted, leaning toward the door like he wanted to adjust himself, and his entire body floated that extra inch up before settling back down. He hadn't touched the seatbelt, but he was there, solid, breathing, eyes fixed on the dark stretch ahead. I didn't say anything. My throat was too dry. The radio crackled with static, even though the station had been coming in clear minutes before. He finally turned his head, and for the first time I caught his eyes. They were a washed-out gray, almost milky, like someone blind. He asked, "Do you ever hear them?" I swallowed, trying to keep my voice even. "Hear who?" His lips barely moved. "The ones walking along the road. They don't always have rides. Sometimes they just follow the cars until their voices wear out." My skin prickled. I glanced in the rear-view mirror, and for a moment I swore I saw shapes along the shoulder, faint as heat mirages keeping pace with us. But when I blinked, the road was empty again. We reached the outskirts of Zapata quicker than I expected. He told me to turn down a narrow road that led toward the lake. The houses there were few, trailers mostly, porches sagging under rusted metal chairs. He told me to stop outside a boarded-up house that looked long abandoned. When I put the truck in park, I turned to ask if he needed anything else. The seat beside me was empty. The door hadn't opened. The air was suddenly heavy with the smell of damp earth again, so thick I gagged. I pulled away fast, heart hammering, headlights carving through the mesquite. When I finally reached my uncle's trailer, I didn't say a word about it. Just drank a beer in silence and tried to convince myself I'd been tired, that I'd imagined him. But the smell lingered in the cab of my truck for days. And the carpet on the passenger side, where his boots should have left dust, was stained darker than the rest, damp in patches that never quite dried. Months later, I thought I'd put it behind me, until I drove FM 1093 near Fulls here with my cousin. It was a humid spring evening, the kind of dusk that paints the fields in purple light. FM 1093 is one of those roads that cuts through old farmland, where weather-beaten houses sit like skeletons on the edge of the asphalt. We passed one in particular, a 2-story farmhouse with the windows boarded, paint stripped bare by decades of wind. My cousin, who was in the passenger seat, leaned forward suddenly and cursed. "Did you see that?" he asked. I slowed. "See what?" He pointed at the top window of the farmhouse. There was a kid's face, right there looking out. I told him he was full of it, but when I turned my head, I saw it too. A pale, round face pressed against the glass, eyes too big for the head. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. My cousin swore and grabbed my arm. I blinked, and when my eyes opened, the face was gone from the window. I breathed out, about to say we must have imagined it, when my cousin's scream nearly made me drive off the road. I turned, and the same child's face was now inches outside his window, level with his head, eyes wide and unblinking. There was no body attached, just the face pressed against the glass like some floating mask. I hit the gas tires, squealing as we tore down the road. The face slid out of view, vanishing into the blur of dusk. We didn't speak until we reached the lights of the highway. When we finally did, my cousin said, "It wasn't just in the window. It wanted to get in. I never take that road at night anymore, and I don't slow for anyone on 83. You tell yourself ghosts are just stories, warnings passed down to keep people careful. But I've smelled the damp earth in my truck, and I've seen the face at the window. And I know some rides you give and some glances you share stay with you long after the night has ended." Highway 83 south of Zapata cuts through a lonely kind of country, where the mesquite leans against rusting barbed wire fences and the road seems to stretch without end. I'd been running that highway since I was a teenager, first sneaking beers with buddies down by Falcon Lake, later commuting back and forth from a job in Laredo. I knew every bend and dip in that asphalt like the back of my hand, and maybe that's why I never thought twice about driving it late at night. My grandmother used to warn me, though. She'd say, "Don't ever pick up anybody on that stretch. People don't belong out there after dark." I chalked it up to her usual superstitions, the same ones that had her salting doorways and hanging rosaries on rearview mirrors. But the older I get, the more her words come back to me. It was early October, one of those nights when the humidity hangs heavy enough that it fogs your windshield no matter how hard the air conditioning blows. I had just wrapped up a long shift and was headed home towards Zapata. The road was empty except for my headlights tunneling through the dark. That's when I saw him, a figure standing on the shoulder, arm out, thumb raised in the old hitchhiker's pose. He looked young, maybe late teens or early 20s, wearing jeans and a jacket too light for the season. I slowed without thinking. Something about his stance, the loneliness of it, triggered that guilty reflex. You see someone stranded in the middle of nowhere, you help. I pulled over, leaned across, and popped the passenger door open. He climbed in quick, grateful, pulling the door shut with a heavy thud. "Thanks, man," he said, voice soft but steady. "Been out here a long time." His hair was dark, damp with sweat or dew, and his eyes seemed deeper than the shadows around us. He told me he was headed towards Zapata, just a few miles down the road. I nodded, eased the car back onto the highway, and the hum of the tires filled the silence. At first, everything felt normal enough, like any odd roadside encounter. He smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like coins clutched too long in the palm. I asked where he was coming from. He said just down south and left it at that. We rode on in silence for a stretch. The radio barely picked up a station, static hissing like insects. I shifted in my seat, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel, and that's when I noticed it. Out of the corner of my eye, something looked wrong with the way he sat. His jeans didn't bunch against the floorboards the way they should. His knees were bent, but his feet weren't resting anywhere. They hovered, inches above the mat, swaying gently like a man sitting on a stool too high for him. My heart kicked hard, but I forced my eyes back to the road. Sweat crawled down my neck. I told myself maybe the floorboard was warped, or maybe I just couldn't see clearly in the dim light. But then he shifted, adjusting himself in the seat, and his whole body rose and settled again without ever touching the ground. The truth hit me like ice water. The boy didn't have feet. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles burned. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop glancing. His jeans ended clean at the ankles, and below them there was nothing but empty space and the faint shimmer of heat mirage in the glow from the dashboard. He noticed me staring. Slowly, his head turned, eyes catching the faint green dashlight. He smiled, but it wasn't the easy grin of some grateful kid. It was too calm, too knowing. "You see it," he whispered. My throat locked up. I couldn't answer. I just pressed harder on the gas, the old truck groaning as the needle climbed. He leaned back like he was enjoying the ride, the ghost of his legs swaying over the floor. I don't know what kept me from pulling over and throwing him out right then. Maybe fear that if I stopped, he'd ask me to. Maybe fear that if I opened the door, I'd see nothing sitting there at all. So I kept driving mile after mile, the road blurring beneath us. He talked after a while, his voice low, almost like he was telling secrets not meant to be repeated. He spoke of soldiers marching in the night, of trucks that rumbled by unseen, of water swallowing men whole. He said he used to walk that road to get home, always thumbing rides from truckers and ranchers. One night no one stopped. By morning he was still walking, but not the same. His words drifted in and out like half a dream, and the longer he spoke, the colder the cab felt, as though the AC had gone from broken to blasting Arctic air. My breath fogged faintly in front of me, though outside it was near 80. At some point, the headlights picked out the first glow of Zapata. Relief nearly buckled me. The hitchhiker leaned forward, staring hard at the town lights. "Right here's fine," he murmured. I slowed near a side road and eased onto the shoulder. The instant the tires crunched gravel, I heard the door unlatch. He turned toward me, eyes darker than the night, and gave a single nod. "Thanks for the lift." Then he swung himself out, never once touching the ground. He hovered there a moment beside the open door, the streetlight above flickering, his shape blurring around the edges like smoke. Then he was gone. The seat beside me was empty, the door shut with no hand to close it. I sat there a long while, the engine idling, my chest heaving like I'd just run miles. Finally, I forced myself back onto the road and rolled into town, every light and shadow suddenly alive with menace. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't turn the truck off right away. I just sat with the engine humming, staring at the empty seat beside me. The smell of metal still lingered faintly, and the floor mat was damp though no rain had touched it. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing the door thud, kept seeing that smile in the glow of the dash. Since then I've heard stories. Other drivers claiming they've picked up a boy on Highway 83, always near the same stretch south of Zapata. They all say he looks normal until he shifts, until you notice the way he hovers above the floor. Some say he talks to them, others claim he never says a word. But they all end the same. He vanishes before they reach town, leaving nothing but silence and the rattle of the road. My grandmother used to say spirits walk where blood was spilled, where souls went restless. I don't know what happened to that boy, but I know one thing for certain now. When I see a figure thumbing for a ride on Highway 83, I keep driving, because I've already carried him once and I won't make that mistake again. But sometimes late at night I swear I hear it again, that heavy door thudding shut beside me and a voice soft as dust saying, "Thanks for the ride." And when that happens, I don't dare look over. I just press harder on the gas and pray the road runs out before the night does. FM 2105 runs quiet through the scrub and mesquite flats east of San Angelo, a stretch of road you can drive for miles without seeing another soul. It's the kind of place where the wind gets caught in the telephone wires and hums like a broken organ, and where the stars stretch so wide, you feel like the sky could swallow you whole. I was coming back late from a work trip to Abilene, pushing past midnight when I saw the glow on the horizon. At first I thought it was a brush fire. Out there, fire spreads fast, and I slowed down, ready to turn back if the flames got too close. But as I crested the low rise near the Pecos River cut, I saw the shape of it clear, a church, small and white, with flames licking up through the roof, the steeple glowing orange against the dark. I pulled off into the caliche lot without even thinking. The crunch of gravel under my tires drowned out by the roar of fire. The whole place was engulfed, yet there was no smoke, no smell of burning wood or tar. The heat, though, that hit me as soon as I stepped out of the car, rolling in waves that made my skin prickle. The church was maybe 30 feet away, and I could see the stained glass in the windows warping, colors bleeding into one another like melted crayons. For a second, I almost ran toward it, looking for people. But something about the silence stopped me cold. A building burning that hard should have been groaning, timbers collapsing, shingles cracking. Instead, it was only the fire itself, loud and unnatural, like it was the only living thing in the world. Then I noticed the doors. Double wooden doors, painted red, standing wide open. Inside, I could see rows of pews, neat and untouched, though the flames danced inches above them. I thought I saw movement, shadows sitting in those pews, shapes that didn't belong to the fire. I blinked, squinting against the light, and when I opened my eyes, the pews were empty again. That was when I realized I hadn't felt any ash or sparks on me, and I wasn't coughing, though the flames rose higher than the steeple. My gut twisted, telling me to get back in the car. I did, but before I turned the key, I glanced back. That church, burning like a lantern, looked almost welcoming, like a beacon in the desert night. By morning, I couldn't shake it, so I drove back out there. Same lot, Same telephone wires buzzing overhead. The church stood whole and white, paint clean, roof intact, not a scorch mark anywhere. Doors swung open as if waiting. When I walked inside, the air was heavy and warm, like a stove had been left running for hours. The pews were cool wood under my hand, but when I touched the altar rail, it burned me. Just a flash of heat, quick enough to make me pull away, but the skin on my palm stayed red the rest of the day. I left fast, my boots echoing on the concrete steps. Over the next few months, I heard other stories. Ranchers heading into town before dawn swore they saw the glow miles out, a full blaze you couldn't miss. And sometimes they heard hymns carried on the wind, voices straining like a congregation trapped in hell. By day, the place was always perfect. I even asked a county deputy about it once, and he gave me a look like I'd mentioned the devil himself. Said the land out there had been cursed since the fort days, when Comanche raids took whole families, and that the first church built on that ground had burned with every soul inside one summer night in 1882. Nobody rebuilt it until the 70s, and the preacher who raised the new one died 3 months after the dedication. Heart gave out while he was in the pulpit right in front of his wife and children. Folks kept going a while, then trickled off until only the walls and the pews were left. I told myself it was nothing but stories, until the second time I saw it. That was late fall after a cold front had pushed through. The sky was sharp and clear, the kind of night where you see your breath hang like smoke. I was alone again, heading back from a friend's place when the glow bloomed on the horizon. This time, though, I didn't stop in the lot. I pulled over 100 yards away, killed the engine, and sat in the dark. The church burned bright, flames rolling out of the roof, but the grass around it stayed black and still. Then I heard them, voices rising up, hundreds all at once. They weren't singing a hymn I recognized, more like a chant, deep and broken, carried on the wind until my chest rattled with it. Through the windshield, I saw the pews fill, just for a heartbeat, with dark silhouettes. Men, women, children, all still, all facing forward. Then they turned. I swear they turned as one, head snapping in my direction. That was enough. I cranked the engine, gravel flying as I tore back onto the road, not looking in the mirror. When I got home, my clothes reeked of smoke, though I'd never gotten close enough to touch the place. The last time I went near FM 2105 was a year later. I don't even know why I drove that way. Maybe some part of me wanted proof that I hadn't lost my mind. The church was there, white and perfect, doors open. I slowed just enough to see sunlight spilling across the pews, and for the briefest moment the wood shimmered like embers, glowing red before turning back to plain oak. I pressed the gas and didn't stop until I hit the lights of San Angelo. People say the church is still there, still burning on certain nights. Some travelers claim if you step inside while the flames rise, you'll hear your name in the chant. They say if you stay long enough, you'll see your place in the pews waiting, as if you've been part of the congregation all along. No one I've ever talked to has admitted going in after dark, but every time I pass the turnoff, I feel heat creep under my collar, and I wonder what would happen if I stopped just once more and walked through those red doors while the fire was alive. I don't think I'd come back out. And if I did, I know I wouldn't come back the same. Highway 83 runs like a scar through the scrublands of South Texas, a long and lonely stretch that feels more like a border between worlds than just a road. The air out there carries the dust of Zapata, a dry bite of mesquite and caliche, and on some nights when the traffic thins to almost nothing, the road belongs to the ghosts. That's where I was, driving back from Laredo to McAllen after a job that had dragged later than I'd planned. It was close to midnight, the kind of hour when even the radio DJs sound tired, and I was fighting the heavy pull of drowsiness with coffee that had gone cold in the cup holder. I saw him before I realized what I was looking at, just a figure at the edge of my high beams. A young man, maybe early 20s, dark hair cut short, jeans, and a worn denim jacket. He was standing with his thumb out, and there was something about the way he stood, still as though carved out of the roadside, that made me press the brakes before I could think better of it. Hitchhikers aren't common anymore, not here, not now, but I rolled to a stop anyway. He opened the passenger door without a word, nodded politely, and slid into the seat. He smelled faintly of river water and smoke, an odd combination I tried not to dwell on. "Headed north," he said in a soft voice, almost drowned out by the hum of the tires. I nodded, pulling back onto the road. For a while, neither of us spoke. The night pressed in against the windshield, the headlights carving out a small bubble of pale safety in the endless black. My eyelids felt heavier than they had any right to be. But then he shifted in his seat and I saw it. My foot nearly jerked off the gas. He wasn't touching the floor. His boots hovered a few inches above the mat, toes dangling as if he were sitting on some invisible ledge no one else could see. I told myself it was shadows, exhaustion, my eyes playing tricks. But when I looked again, the truth didn't change. He was floating. My throat went dry, but I forced my voice steady. "You from around here?" I asked. He turned his head toward me, and in the passing sweep of a roadside reflector, I saw his face clearer. He looked normal enough, maybe a bit pale, but his eyes held something deep in them like the dull shine of a coin at the bottom of a well. "Used to be," he said. His words carried weight like he meant more than he was saying. We rode on, the silence thicker than before until the night broke with a sound I'll never forget, a whistle, high and thin, rising out of the marshy flatland to our right. 3 short notes, deliberate. I hadn't whistled. Neither had he. But the sound was answered, an echo that seemed to carry through the reeds and water, a perfect reply that wasn't quite natural. I swallowed, hands tightening on the wheel as the turnoff for FM 457 came up, the road that cut out toward Bay City and the marshes. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of brine and rot, even though the coast was miles away. He smiled then, a slow curl of his lips, and he leaned closer to the window. "They're calling," he whispered. Before I could ask what he meant, another whistle came, 3 short notes again, this time closer, right outside the glass. My heart slammed against my ribs. I pressed the accelerator harder, the old engine whining as the car picked up speed. The road narrowed, the marshland rising up on both sides, tall grass brushing the shoulders. The whistles followed. Each one answered, each one closer, until the sound wasn't just outside but all around. Inside the car, in my ears, behind my eyes. Then came the knocking. A sharp rap against the passenger side window, then another on the rear door, knuckles on glass as if unseen hands were tapping to be let in. My hitchhiker didn't flinch. He just watched the dark beyond the glass with a calmness that made my skin crawl. "Don't ignore them," he said quietly. "Not here." I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but the words froze in my throat. The knocking grew louder, faster, like impatient children drumming their fists against a locked door. I slammed the car into a higher gear and roared down the straightaway, the marsh whipping past in a blur of black and silver. The sound didn't fade. It followed, chasing, surrounding. Every window rattled with pounding fists. I risked a glance at him, and that's when I saw the truth. His shadow wasn't right. In the flicker of passing mile markers, the outline of his body didn't match the boy in the seat. It was taller, broader, twisted. Something hunched and long-fingered, clinging to the passenger side like it had been riding with me all along. I nearly lost control of the wheel, swerving back onto the lane, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. His smile widened, too wide, and the air inside the car dropped cold, the windows fogging over in an instant. My breath came out in white plumes. He leaned closer, whispering against my ear, "Whistle back." My lips were numb, but some instinct deeper than fear forced me to do it. I whistled, shaky and weak, 3 short notes. The car seemed to shudder. The pounding ceased and the marshland fell silent except for the rushing wind. My passenger leaned back in his seat, satisfied, and for the first time since he'd climbed in, he looked straight at me. His eyes weren't human anymore. They glowed faintly, pale and watery like the moon on a pond. "You'll be fine now," he said, "as long as you always answer." He faded then, right before my eyes, dissolving into mist that sank into the floorboard and vanished altogether. The seat beside me was empty, but the faint smell of river water and smoke lingered. I drove all the way to Bay City without stopping, without daring to look in the mirrors. When I finally pulled into a gas station, the neon lights buzzing overhead, I realized my legs were trembling so badly I could hardly stand. I checked the passenger seat, the back seat, every inch of the car. Nothing, just my reflection in the windows, pale and wide-eyed. But when the wind picked up, brushing through the power lines above, I heard it again. A whistle, faint but clear. 3 short notes echoing back, waiting for my reply. And without thinking, without even deciding, I whistled back. Because something deep in me knew the truth. If I didn't answer, they would come knocking again. And next time, they wouldn't wait outside the glass. Highway 83 south of Laredo runs like a vein through brush country, carrying truckers, hunters, and families down toward Zapata, where the Rio Grande bends in wide brown arcs. It's a lonely stretch at night, wind pressing against the mesquite and coyotes slipping out onto the shoulders. Folks around there will tell you not to stop for hitchhikers after dark. They'll mention a boy you might see thumbing for a ride near the turnoffs, thin frame, hair falling across his eyes, and jeans too clean for a drifter. He won't talk much, just nod, polite as a Sunday school kid. But if you take him in, you'll notice something wrong when he shifts in the seat. His boots don't touch the mat. His feet aren't there at all, just trousers hanging, the hems moving as if brushing against something you can't see. More than one driver swears the air gets colder inside the cab like someone opened a freezer door. The radio fizzles. He'll look at you then, and that's when most slam the brakes and tell him to get out. Only he doesn't open the door. He's just gone, like he stepped through the dash and out into the night. I heard it first from a trucker in a Zapata cafe, hands shaking on his coffee. Said he still drives Highway 83 but never after midnight. Said he sees him sometimes in the mirrors waiting. That same country has another story, maybe worse. County Road 531 runs rough through scrubland north of town, a two-lane cutting between cedar breaks and caliche dust. During the day it's ordinary, ranch fences sagging, buzzards circling, old machinery rusting in the fields. But after sundown, drivers say the ditches fill with children. Not the noisy kind, not local kids out daring each other, but quiet ones. Pale and dressed like photographs from your grandmother's attic. Depression-era overalls, little dresses with collars, shoes worn thin. They walk in pairs, hand in hand, stepping slow as if in a parade. You can pass them without trouble if you keep steady. But honk your horn, and every head turns at once. They'll face you together, dozens of them, and every smile is wide and wrong, and behind those grins are sockets smooth and black, no eyes at all. One woman said she pulled over after seeing them because she thought it was some kind of church outing. Her husband got out shouting, asking if they were lost. The children never spoke. They just stood, hands locked, smiling. Then the couple heard a sound under the car, like nails dragging the frame. They fled without looking back, swearing they left scratches on the undercarriage. People argue about what those kids are. Some say they're from a school bus that overturned in the 30s, lost in a flood. Others whisper about fevers that burned through the valley when work was scarce. Whole families buried in shallow ground off the road. Ranchers claim their grandparents warned them about the ditch children, told them to never honk, never draw attention. There are stories of wrecks on 531 that left no survivors but were blamed on drivers swerving when the children turned. And now folks who use that road after dark roll their windows up tight and keep their horns silent. Even if a deer crosses sudden or a stray cow wanders loose, better the animal than the children, they'll say. Better to hit something flesh and bone than to make those eyeless faces smile at you. Highway 83 has always felt like a road that stretches farther than it should, running down through ranch country and borderland heat, a place where the air tastes of dust and mesquite smoke. I was driving south towards Zapata late one evening, the radio barely catching some AM station out of Laredo when I saw him. A young man, thumb stuck out, head tilted just so, the classic stance of a hitchhiker. He looked out of place on that lonely stretch. No backpack, no duffel bag, just jeans, a t-shirt, and the kind of face you glance at and instantly forget. I slowed down, maybe against my better judgment, and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. He jogged up to the passenger side with an easy stride, opened the door without hesitation, and slid in. His voice was soft, polite, almost too polite when he said, "Thanks for the ride." I nodded, asked where he was heading. He gave me a vague answer, something like, "Down the road's fine," and settled back in the seat. The first few miles were ordinary enough. He made small talk, asked about the weather, said he was from around here but never gave a town name. The strangeness crept in slowly, like the way my headlights didn't seem to touch him fully, the edges of his body bleeding into shadow. I brushed it off, chalked it up to the dim interior light. But then he shifted, leaning forward to adjust the air vent, and that was when I saw it. His jeans bunched up, but below the knees there was nothing. No boots, no legs, no feet pressed against the floorboard. He hovered inches above the car mat, like the seat itself was supporting him midair. My stomach knotted and I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I wanted to slam the brakes, pull over, demand he get out, but something about his presence kept me frozen. He didn't notice my stare, or maybe he did and didn't care. Instead, he turned his head toward me with a faint smile and said, "You drive safe out here. Not everyone makes it past mile marker 78. His voice wasn't threatening, but it carried weight, like a warning delivered from the other side of something I couldn't name. I didn't answer. The road ahead stretched long and dark, and I counted the seconds until I could get rid of him. By the time we reached the next crossroad, he told me this was far enough. I pulled over, heart hammering in my chest. He thanked me again, opened the door, and stepped out, or rather drifted out, touching the ground without sound or weight. I blinked and he was gone, the door swinging shut on its own. I sat there with the engine idling, staring into the empty night, before finally pressing down on the gas and fleeing that stretch of highway like a man chased. I never saw him again, though every time I drive Highway 83 near Zapata, I find myself checking the shoulder, half expecting to see that young man waiting for another ride, floating above the earth with no feet to carry him. But that wasn't the end of it. Months later, near Marble Falls, I was heading west on FM 2147 when I encountered something else. The night was clear, the kind where the stars shine sharp enough to cut, and I was cruising at 50 when movement on the right caught my eye. From the tree line, a single tire rolled out, black against the pale dirt. At first I thought it was debris, maybe from a truck, but this tire didn't wobble or veer. It rolled in perfect rhythm with my car, bouncing lightly as if invisible hands steadied it. The faster I drove, the faster it matched me, keeping pace alongside the passenger window. My mouth went dry. I tapped the brakes and the tire slowed too, never tipping, never losing balance. It felt deliberate, as though it knew me, was waiting for something. I stopped the car completely, engine humming in the stillness, and the tire rolled a few more feet before gently tipping over onto its side. Relief washed over me for a split second until I realized it hadn't just stopped. It vanished. One moment it was lying in the gravel. The next the space was empty. No mark, no sound, no trace of rubber or dust. I sat frozen, headlights washing the empty patch of road, my ears straining for the crunch of movement in the brush. There was nothing, only the faint rustle of night creatures far off in the trees. I put the car in gear, heart thudding hard enough to rattle my ribs, and drove on without looking back. Later, when I asked around town, a gas station clerk in Marble Falls told me people see that tire often. "It comes out to meet you," he said, eyes flat as if reciting a story too often told. "Sometimes it follows a car for miles, and sometimes, if you're unlucky, you'll hear it bounce in your trunk long after you've left the road. I haven't driven FM 2147 since." Highway 83 and FM 2147 are 100 miles apart, two different stretches of Texas road, but I can't shake the feeling that they're connected somehow, tied by something that waits for travelers who pass through after dark. Maybe it's just bad luck, maybe it's something worse. All I know is every time I see someone thumbing for a ride or a piece of debris on the shoulder, I keep driving. Because out here, not everything you pick up or pass by is what it seems, and sometimes the road itself wants something from you. Highway 67 runs long and quiet through the scrub country of West Texas, a road where headlights are sometimes the only proof of life for miles. I was heading north out of Presidio one warm fall evening, trying to make Del Rio before midnight. The sun had already dropped behind the low hills and left the sky a bruised purple, the kind of twilight that turns mesquite trees into hunched black shapes along the roadside. I had the windows cracked and the air smelled of dry earth and faint gasoline, the kind of scent you catch when you've been driving for hours with no stop but the occasional pump at a lonely station. That stretch of 67 always made me feel watched somehow, like the desert carried its own eyes. And on that night, it proved I wasn't wrong. About 20 miles past Marfa, just when the two lanes seemed to straighten forever, I saw the red and blues flicker in my rear view. A patrol car, black and white, the old style you don't see much anymore, glided behind me with an ease that made my gut clench. I checked my speed. I wasn't more than 5 over, but I eased onto the shoulder, dust pluming up behind me as I came to a stop. The car pulled in close, headlights washing the side mirror. My stomach knotted when I noticed there were no plates on the vehicle, just empty slots front and back. The door opened with a creak that cut through the night, and a deputy stepped out. He was tall and lean, with a hat pulled low, the brim hiding most of his face. He didn't say a word at first, just walked up with that stiff-backed gait lawmen seem to practice. When he reached the window, I rolled it down and the night air pressed in. warm and strange with the faint smell of something burnt. He tipped his hat at me, slow and deliberate, but his eyes stayed in shadow. "Evenin'," he said in a voice that sounded like gravel rolled in a dry creek bed. I stammered something about not meaning to speed. He shook his head once, almost kindly. "Just making sure you're safe on the road," he said. His words dragged a little, like he was tired. Then he leaned down closer, and for a moment I saw his face under the hat brim. It looked sunburnt, weathered, and cracked at the edges, but what struck me most was the eyes. They didn't shine. They looked dull, like glass marbles sunk too deep into sockets. I nodded, too nervous to say much more. He gave another tip of the hat, turned on his heel, and walked back to the car. But when he opened the door, there was no light inside, no dash glow, nothing but black. He stepped into it anyway, and in the next blink, both he and the car were gone. Not rolled away, not driven off, just gone, leaving only the dust I'd stirred hanging in the headlight beams. I sat frozen at the wheel until a horn blasted behind me. A pickup had pulled up, the driver leaning out with a confused look, asking if I'd broken down. I muttered something and got back on the road, hands trembling around the wheel. By the time I reached Del Rio, I was convincing myself maybe I'd dozed off at the wheel, imagined the whole thing, but the dust cloud had been real, and the smell of burnt air clung to my clothes. The next morning, I mentioned it to a waitress at a diner off the main drag. She was older, silver hair piled in a bun, pouring coffee with the steadiness of someone who'd done it 40 years. I told her about the old patrol car, the deputy, the vanish. She stiffened a little, set down the pot, and gave me a long look. "You saw him on 67, she said flatly, not a question. I nodded. "People been seeing that car for years. Always a black and white with no plates. Always a deputy who tips his hat. Story goes he died on that road back in the 50s chasing a bootlegger late one night. Car rolled down an embankment, caught fire. Folks said they pulled him out half burned, but he never made it to the hospital. Some say he don't know he's dead, just keeps pulling folks over, making sure the road's safe. Others say he's looking for the one that got away." I asked if anyone knew his name. She just shook her head. "Sheriff's office don't talk about it, but none of their boys fit the look you described. Never have." Her words stuck with me. That night on the road, I drove slower, eyes flicking to the mirror at every glow behind me. Around midnight, just outside Alpine, the desert quiet pressing down heavy, I caught sight of the same red and blue flicker. My chest went cold. I braked and pulled to the shoulder, heart hammering. But this time no car followed. Just the glow dancing in the dust like it was coming from nowhere at all. I didn't wait. I slammed the gas and tore down the highway, swearing I heard a voice carried on the wind, low and even, telling me again to be safe on the road. To this day, when I drive 67 after dark, I keep to the limit, and every time headlights flare behind me, I brace myself for a black and white with no plates, and a deputy who tips his hat before vanishing into the desert night. Highway 30 near Huntsville is an unsettling road even in daylight. The kind of stretch where the pine trees lean in close and the asphalt seems swallowed by shadow no matter how bright the sky is. At night it's worse. Locals talk about the prison lights glowing faintly in the distance, a reminder that Huntsville houses more death than life, more men waiting for their sentences than families setting down roots. I had driven that road dozens of times without incident, usually keeping the radio on to drown out the way the silence presses heavy against the windows. But the night I saw them, I wasn't thinking about anything supernatural. I was thinking about staying awake, keeping between the faded yellow lines and making it back home before my eyelids gave up on me. It was just after 2 in the morning when my headlights caught the first set of taillights. Nothing unusual about that. What caught my attention was how dim they seemed, like the bulbs were dying and how the car holding them was moving far too slow. 20 miles an hour on a stretch of highway where most people cruise at 70, I muttered under my breath, eased off the gas, and figured I'd pass as soon as there was a break in the oncoming lane. But when I leaned forward, I realized there wasn't just one car ahead. There were 2. Then 3, then a whole line of them, red taillights stretching out like a string of dying embers disappearing into the night. The odd thing was the silence. Usually you can hear the low hum of tires and the hiss of engines even through rolled-up glass if you're close enough. But when I cracked my window to see if maybe one of them was in distress, there was nothing. Just the wind cutting through the pines and the faint buzz of cicadas, even though it was early fall and they should have been quiet by then. No engine noise, no radios, no brake squeals. Just a row of old cars creeping at 20 miles per hour, all perfectly spaced, all perfectly aligned like they were being towed by an invisible rope. I kept following because there was nowhere else to go. The road didn't offer many shoulders, and every time I thought about pulling off and letting them get farther ahead, the darkness of the trees seemed to lean in tighter, swallowing the idea before it could form, so I stayed behind, my own headlights reflecting off their faded bumpers, and I began to notice details. The cars were old. Not classic old, not showroom condition relics, but rust-eaten Fords and Chevrolets, Buicks with cracked windshields and chipped chrome, models I hadn't seen on the road in 20 years, maybe 30. Their paint was faded like they'd been baking under a sun that no longer existed. And the license plates were the older kind too. The long white rectangles with the blocky black letters Texas stopped issuing back in the 90s. It was when I looked at the drivers that my mouth went dry. Each car had one, and each driver sat bolt upright, both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed forward. I mean fixed like they were nailed to some invisible point on the horizon. The headlights coming from the opposite lane flashed across their faces, and for a moment at a time I could see them. Pale, slack, with lips pressed thin as though speech was no longer part of their design. Men, women, some young, some old, but all wearing the same expression. The same unblinking stare. Not one of them turned their head. Not one of them checked a mirror or glanced to the side. They drove with the patience of the dead. I told myself I was tired, that my mind was bending headlights into shapes they weren't. But my knuckles were whitening on the wheel, and my chest was tight. I tried the radio to cut through it, turning the dial until static gave way to the faint hum of a country station. But the music sounded warped, like the guitars were being played underwater. I switched it off and kept driving, sweat starting to form at the base of my neck. The procession went on. A mile, maybe two. My sense of distance started to blur. Time felt stretched, each minute pulling into 5. The night seemed endless, and those red taillights never broke formation, never blinked or brightened. Just a steady, dying glow leading me deeper into the dark. I realized then that the road signs had disappeared. I hadn't seen one in a while. Not a mile marker, not a reflective post. Just pine trees hemming me in and that line of cars guiding me forward. Then without warning, they turned. Not onto a road. I would have seen a cross street, a gravel turnout, anything. They just veered off in unison, left tires dipping into the weeds at the shoulder, and continued on through the trees like the forest was no obstacle at all. Branches didn't bend, grass didn't crush, they just moved through, headlights fading into the black. In less than a minute, they were gone. The road was empty save for me, idling in the middle of Highway 30 with my breath fogging the windshield. I should have kept going. That would have been the smart thing. But curiosity is a mean thing on lonely roads. I put the truck in park, stepped out, and let the night swallow me. The air smelled of resin and damp earth, and the silence was complete. A silence so heavy it felt like something pressing on my eardrums. I crossed to where they had left the road, expecting to see tire tracks in the dirt, branches broken, something. There was nothing. Just grass standing tall and pine needles scattered like they hadn't been disturbed in years. That was when I heard it, faint at first, then swelling. The low, steady hum of engines. Not near, but not far either. Like they were idling somewhere just out of reach. I stood still, every nerve in my body telling me to move, but my feet refused. The sound grew surrounding me, vibrating in the air, and with it came something else. A coldness. Not the kind you feel when the temperature drops, but the kind that sinks inside you, rattling your bones, making your heart slow just a fraction too much. I swear I saw the faintest glimmer of headlights deep in the trees, weaving between trunks without ever touching them. I stumbled back to my truck, slammed the door, and turned the key so hard I thought it might snap. The engine roared to life, and for a heartbeat the headlights flickered like they might die, but then they held. I floored it, tires spitting gravel, and didn't let up until Huntsville's sodium orange glow broke the horizon. Even then I didn't stop. I drove all the way to my driveway before I dared cut the engine, and when I sat in the sudden quiet I realized my hands were trembling too much to even reach for the door handle. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. It sounded too much like a dream, and people around here have their own stories anyway, their own quiet warnings about that stretch of road. But when I finally worked up the nerve to mention it to an older co-worker, he just nodded. He said people have been seeing it for years. A funeral procession for the forgotten, he called it. Folks who died without ceremony, prisoners buried nameless in the fields behind the walls, Families taken in accidents nobody bothered to write down. They drive together now every so often. In the cars they left behind or the ones they were carried in. Headlights stretched into eternity. He said the smart ones pull over and let them pass. The stupid ones follow. When he said that, I felt my stomach knot. Because I had followed, hadn't I? I had kept pace with them for miles, staring at their pale faces, listening to their silence. And if what he said was true, if the ones who follow never come back, then I've been living on borrowed time ever since that night. Some evenings when the wind drops and the highway is quiet, I think I hear it again. The low hum of engines where no cars are. The flicker of headlights in the trees. And every time I know they'll be waiting for me to fall in line. The rigs out on Ranch Road 33 burn like skeletal towers against the dark, their flames licking the sky in ragged orange strokes that bend and twist with the wind. If you've ever driven that stretch at night, you know how empty it feels, how the blacktop runs flat and unforgiving with nothing but mesquite brush and the occasional jackrabbit darting across your headlights. It isn't the kind of road you take unless you need to. My need came from work. I was running crude samples between a field lab outside Big Lake and a testing facility closer to San Angelo. A job I'd done 100 times without much thought. Until the night I pulled over near one of those flares to piss and heard something that made me believe I'd gone crazy. At first it was just the usual roar, the kind of low, steady hiss a flame that size makes, a sound like an enormous blowtorch that never runs out of fuel. The air shimmered around it, even though the wind was cold enough to cut through my jacket. The kind of chill that seeps in during late winter on the West Texas plains. My boots crunched on gravel and I was about 10 steps from the edge of the chain link when I heard it. Clear, sharp, carried right through the static of burning gas, my own name. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't the voice of any man I knew. It had the sharp drawl of my mother's, though she'd been dead 3 years, calling me just the way she used to when she wanted me inside before dark. A stretched out syllable, a tone that made my stomach clench because it was so damn familiar. I froze with my hands still at my belt buckle, eyes fixed on the flame. It danced like it always did. No strange shapes, no figures in the fire, just raw combustion clawing into the sky. But then it came again. Softer this time, almost whispered, but somehow sharper than the wind, and there was no mistaking it. It said my name exactly the way she would. The kind of sound that cut straight into old memory like a hook dragged across bone. I zipped back up and walked to the truck fast. Not running, not looking back, because something told me that if I turned, the flame wouldn't be a flame anymore. The highway was black and empty when I pulled out. I kept telling myself it was exhaustion, that after 12 hours of hauling samples, my brain was dredging voices from the grave. But that stretch of 33 is long and bare. Nothing out there but pump jacks bowing in the dark and those angry flares marking the ground like candles on a black cake. The farther I drove, the worse it got. Each time I passed a flare, the voice came again. Sometimes low, sometimes urgent, sometimes shifting into the tones of people I'd known all my life. My high school coach, my brother who still lived in Uvalde, a girl I'd dated when I was 19. Each voice came from the same place, the fire roaring in the dark. And each one called only one thing, my name. Like a command, like an invitation. By the time I reached the 4th stack, my hands were slick with sweat and the steering wheel felt like it was trying to twist under my palms. The truck pulled left without my meaning to, edging toward the gravel shoulder. My headlights caught the chain link fencing, the skeletal scaffolding of another flare, and I swore I saw a figure standing against it, lit by the bloom of orange flame. Just a shadow maybe, but it raised its arm like it was waving. The voices bled into one another, then layering, overlapping, all calling at once. The sound wasn't carried by the wind anymore. It was inside the cab with me, filling it, as if the vents were breathing names in my ears. I stomped the accelerator and forced the truck back onto the road, heart hammering. I didn't stop again until I saw the faint glow of a diner near Sterling City. The waitress gave me one look and asked if I was all right. I must have been pale, sweating through my shirt in the cold. I told her I was fine, just road tired, but my hands shook so bad when I lifted the coffee cup that half of it sloshed onto the counter. She asked where I'd come from, and when I told her Ranch Road 33, she got quiet. Real quiet. She set down the pot, wiped her hands on her apron, and leaned close like she didn't want the trucker in the booth behind me to hear. "You don't stop near those flares," she said. "Not at night. My cousin worked rigs out there. He told me once the flame isn't what you think it is. He said it's got a voice, said it talks when it knows you're listening. He shot himself 2 months later. Then she straightened like she'd said too much, poured coffee for the trucker, and didn't meet my eyes again. I told myself I'd imagined it all. That stress and grief and hours on the road had twisted me up, until the next week when I had to make the same run. This time I promised I wouldn't stop, wouldn't even look, just drive. But promises don't mean much when you're out there alone on a black ribbon of road with nothing but fire to mark your way. The second flare I passed that night was smaller, its flame ragged, coughing smoke, and through the roar came a voice I hadn't heard since the day of my mother's funeral. I had been the only one at her bedside when she died, her breath rattling, her hand clawing at mine. I'll never forget her last words, and damned if those weren't the exact ones I heard in the hiss of the flame. Don't leave me. I nearly drove into the ditch. Every nerve in my body screamed to stop, to turn around, to answer her, to go to that fire. But I didn't. I kept going, hands locked on the wheel, tears in my eyes, until I hit the highway back toward San Angelo. That night I dreamed of fire filling my bedroom, voices whispering in the smoke, pulling me out of sleep with my name. When I woke, my throat was raw, like I'd been calling back to them. It's been weeks since then, and I don't take that road anymore. I told the lab manager I'd quit before I'd haul anything down 33 again. He laughed like I was superstitious, told me every flare stack hisses and roars. That sound plays tricks on tired ears. Maybe he's right, but he didn't see what I saw. He didn't hear his dead mother calling his name through fire. Sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I hear it again, faint and low as if carried from miles away, a whisper at the edge of hearing. My name rising from a flame I can't see but that I know is waiting out there in the dark fields, still burning, still calling, and I know the truth, the one I'll never admit to anyone. If I ever hear the right voice again, the one I can't resist, I won't be able to keep driving. I'll stop. I'll step through the fence, and whatever waits in that fire will finally have me. Highway 21 runs quiet through the heart of Texas, a ribbon of asphalt that threads past forgotten barns, cedar thickets, and towns so small they barely cling to the map. Nights out there are darker than most folks from the city can stomach. The stars burn sharp, but the land itself swallows the light, and the road feels like it belongs to no one. That's where I first saw the horse. I was coming back from San Marcos late one evening, tired from a day that had stretched on too long. My headlights carved a pale tunnel through the night, and out of that tunnel came the rhythmic clop of hooves. At first I thought it was a trick of the road, maybe a sound carried on the wind or my mind playing catch-up after too much coffee. But then it appeared ahead of me, trotting steady down the center line as though it had all the right in the world. A horse, black against the pale shimmer of my high beams, with a faint sheen on its flanks as though it had been sweating. No rider. Just the horse moving smooth like it had somewhere to be. I slowed instinctively, tires crunching gravel as I eased onto the shoulder. The horse didn't spook, didn't even look at me. Its hooves rang sharp against the asphalt, each strike perfectly measured as if it were following some invisible beat. The night was dead still otherwise. Not even the hum of cicadas that usually carried on long past sundown. Just the horse. Then my eyes adjusted, and I swear on everything I know to be true, I saw a shape swaying above the saddle. At first just a shimmer, like heat waves rising off blacktop in August, but clearer with every blink. A cowboy, tall and lean, his hat tilted low, the outline faint as smoke against the stars. I could see the shape of his shoulders, his arm resting casual on the horn, and the suggestion of spurs flashing faint where no light should have reached. My mouth went dry. I told myself it was a trick of the glass, some reflection off my windshield, but then the horse veered slightly, hooves clicking closer to the shoulder, and the rider moved with it. The saddle creaked, leather on leather, though the night wind was so still it felt like the sound was meant for me alone. I should have driven. I know that. Every story I grew up with, every warning from my father about stopping for strange things on lonely roads should have been enough. But there was something in the way the horse moved, something deliberate that made me kill the engine and roll the window down. I sat there, hand gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened as the pair drew level with my truck. The horse's breath puffed white like steam rising from a kettle, though the air was warm enough I'd shed my jacket an hour back. The outline of the cowboy turned his head. Not the horse, but the rider. The faint blur of him shifted toward me, and I felt the weight of his gaze settle into my chest. My heart stumbled in its rhythm, as if trying to match the steady beat of those phantom hooves. When he passed, I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding the breath in. The horse kept going, steady as ever, the faint shape rocking with each step. I thought maybe that was the end of it. A story I'd tell later when the beer was flowing and the lights were on, and maybe I'd even laugh at myself for letting it crawl under my skin. But as the taillights faded into the black, something in me twisted. I felt a tug, not on my arm or my shoulder, but deeper, like a rope cinched around my chest and drawn tight. Before I could stop myself, I flicked the headlights back on and eased back onto the road, following at a crawl. The horse never sped up, never slowed down. My truck kept pace without effort, as though my foot had no say in the matter. The glow of my beams painted its flanks, but the cowboy's outline stayed just beyond clarity. When I leaned forward, trying to make out more, my eyes burned like I'd stared too long into a welding torch. I blinked hard, vision swimming, and for a moment I swore the rider was clearer, his head turned again toward me. I could see the pale shine of eyes under the brim, not glowing, just wrong, like glass marbles catching a faint reflection. I drove behind him like that for miles. Couldn't have said how many. The road signs blurred past, unmarked county roads that led into dark fields, mailboxes with names I didn't recognize. Time felt stretched, pulled thin, and my dashboard clock might as well have been painted on for all the sense it made. At some point, the fuel gauge needle quivered, the orange warning light flicking on, though I'd filled up in San Marcos before heading out. I knew I had enough to make it to Bryan without worry, but the needle kept sinking as though the road itself was drinking me dry. That's when the horse finally stopped. No slowing, no stumble, just a dead halt in the middle of the road, hooves planted. I hit the brakes hard enough my seatbelt locked, tires squealing on the pavement. My headlights bathed the pair in light and the cowboy turned once more. This time his face was clear enough to see, though I wish to God it hadn't been. His skin was stretched tight, leathery and cracked, lips peeled back as though they'd dried that way. His teeth were blackened stubs, some worn flat, some gone altogether, and his eyes were hollow pits that reflected nothing of my beams. He leaned forward in the saddle, and the sound that came out of him was not words but a dry rattle, like a snake's warning or a throat that hadn't known water in decades. The horse stamped once, the sound ringing out sharp as a gunshot, and then both rider and mount dissolved. Not like smoke dispersing, not like a trick of light, but gone in the blink of an eye. 1 second they were there, the next the road was bare, stretching empty in both directions. I sat there with my engine idling, heart hammering so hard it rattled the seat. The night was still again, but I could smell something sharp like burnt leather mixed with wet earth. My fuel gauge hovered on empty, though the truck had never sputtered. I turned it around, not trusting the stretch ahead, and drove back toward town. The road behind me stayed dark in the mirrors, as though the beams couldn't reach farther than a few feet. When I finally rolled into a gas station, the pump clicked off after barely a gallon, though the needle crawled back to full. The old man behind the counter gave me a look when I paid, a knowing sort of glance, and said nothing. I've told myself 100 times it was exhaustion, tricks of the eyes, the kind of hallucinations that creep in when you're too tired to drive. But I know better. Highway 21 has been there a long time, longer than most of the towns it threads through, and the land keeps its memories. Some nights when I'm driving past those stretches again, I roll my window up tight and keep my eyes dead ahead, because once you've seen the lone rider, you can't help but listen for the rhythm of hooves in the silence, and if you stop too long to watch, you might just find yourself following him into a part of Texas that doesn't let you come back. Midland County has always been strange at night. The highways curling through oil field country with those orange flares lighting up the sky like giant lighters held to heaven. FM 1788 in particular carries a weight after dark. A stretch of road that seems to breathe on its own. The wind pulling dust across the asphalt. The smell of crude oil riding the breeze. And the hulking silhouettes of pump jacks bowing up and down like tired giants. It was somewhere along this highway, just past the split where the road dips near Greenwood, that I saw it. A truck stop diner that shouldn't have been there. I had been driving for hours hauling steel pipe out of Odessa, dog-tired, living on energy drinks and the hum of the rig's engine. The dashboard clock glowed 2:37 a.m., the CB dead silent. I should have pushed through, but when the neon appeared up ahead, pink and blue tubes spelling out Diner Open 24HRS. I felt relief so sharp it bordered on joy. That's the kind of tired I was. The parking lot looked clean too, fresh asphalt without a single pothole. Not the cracked, dust-patched ground I was used to around these parts. 3 rigs were parked in a neat row, all idling, the heat from their stacks shimmering. The bell over the door jingled when I stepped in, and the smell hit me first. Bacon, coffee, hot grease on a clean grill, the kind of smell that reaches right into your bones and tells you you're safe, even if you're not. The diner was alive with soft chatter, country music low on the jukebox, and the flickering glow of neon seeping through the blinds. The waitresses wore uniforms, real uniforms like something out of the 1960s, light pink dresses with white aprons, hair pinned up neat. One of them, a woman maybe in her 40s, smiled like she'd been expecting me. "Sit anywhere you like, hun," she said, coffee pot already in her hand. The booths were cushioned red vinyl, no rips, no duct tape patches. I slid into one by the window and she poured me coffee before I asked. It was hot, fresh, not that scorched dishwater most roadside places pass off. A menu lay waiting on the table. I flipped through it, but the items were simple. Burgers, eggs, chicken fried steak, pie. No prices listed. When I asked for a cheeseburger and fries, she nodded like I'd chosen right. The other haulers looked normal enough, men in work shirts and caps, sunburnt skin, heavy shoulders. But when I really looked, none of them were eating. Plates sat in front of them, steam rising untouched. They were talking, sure, but not about anything I could make sense of. Their voices low, like they were running through the same script on repeat. One laughed too loud, a sharp bark, then went right back to muttering. I pushed the thought away when the food came. That burger was perfect. Juicy, cooked medium, grease soaking into the bun. The fries were hot and crisp, just salted right. I ate like I hadn't seen food in days, and the waitress never let my coffee go below half a cup. It wasn't until I leaned back, full and content, that I noticed something odd. The jukebox was playing Blue Bayou by Roy Orbison, but the record wasn't spinning. And the waitress who had poured me coffee at the start hadn't stopped moving, not once. She circled the room like she was running on rails, refilling cups that weren't empty, wiping counters that weren't dirty. I should have left then, paid my thanks, walked out, climbed back into the cab. But I made a mistake. I slid the fork across the plate, tapping it against the edge, and when I stood up to go, I slipped it into my jacket pocket without thinking. Not to steal. Just one of those nervous habits like pocketing a pen at the bank. Something about the place felt like a dream, and I wanted something solid to remind me it had been real. The waitress was at the register, smiling. "You drive safe now, hun," she said. Her eyes flicked down to my jacket pocket, and for the briefest second her smile faltered. Just a twitch. Then it was back wide and welcoming. The bell jingled as I left. I don't remember walking to my truck. I don't remember starting the engine. One second I was pushing the door open, and the next I was slamming the brakes hard enough to rattle my teeth. Because I wasn't at the diner anymore. I was barreling down FM 1788, headlights cutting through pitch dark, dust swirling in the beams. The lot was gone. The neon was gone. There was nothing on either side but mesquite brush and pump jacks bowing in the distance. I pulled over, shaking. My hands were slick on the wheel. The night was dead silent, no rigs idling, no jukebox, no voices. And in my pocket, that fork. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. It wasn't stainless steel anymore. It was old, rusted, the tines blackened, and it was wet. I held it under the dome light and felt my stomach heave. The metal was smeared with something dark, sticky, and unmistakable. Blood. I hurled it out the window and watched it disappear into the gravel. My heart hammered in my chest like it was trying to climb free. I drove the rest of the night without stopping, without daring to check my mirrors. Every diner I passed, real ones glowing under fluorescent lights I couldn't look at. Even now, years later, I don't stop on that road at night. I keep my thermos filled, keep snacks in the cab, because I know if I get tired enough, if I let my guard down, that neon glow might come back, rising out of the dark like salvation. And if I'm foolish enough to walk through those doors again, I know better than to touch a single thing. The others, the old-timers, they'll tell you the same. They'll laugh, maybe act like it's just another trucker story. But I've seen the way they grip their coffee mugs tighter when someone mentions FM 1788. I've seen the way their eyes flick to the corners of a room, like they're listening for a jukebox that isn't there. The diner calls to the ones who are too tired to resist, who crave comfort in the middle of nowhere. And it always gives hot coffee, perfect food, friendly faces. All it asks is that you take nothing with you. Nothing at all. But men are weak. Men pocket forks. Men wipe their mouths with napkins and shove them in their coats. And men like that wake up miles down the road, hands stained, hearts racing, the smell of blood thick in the cab. FM 1788 doesn't forgive. It only reminds. And sometimes when I'm too deep in the drive and the night feels heavy enough to press me into my seat, I swear I see neon flickering in the rear view, calling me back. The thing about Texas roads is that no matter how many times you've driven them, no matter how well you think you know where a bend will take you, the land has a way of shifting under your wheels. Asphalt gets laid over old cattle trails, highways, spliced through forgotten burial grounds, and those narrow county roads that crisscross farmland and scrub brush seem to sprout intersections where you swear none existed the week before. I found that out one summer evening when I was driving back from a job in Caldwell, just trying to shave a few minutes off the trip home. I'd done what everyone in my part of Burleson County does, cut through the back roads instead of following the main stretch of Highway 21. Normally it's just a quiet, empty drive. Nothing but fields, fence lines, and the occasional farmhouse light. But that night the road didn't look quite right. It was the way the air felt first, thick and heavy even though the sun had dipped below the tree line and the temperature should have dropped. The sky was fading from orange to purple, the cicadas rattling loud in the ditches, and the smell of dust kicked up from my tires clung to the air. I came around a familiar bend where an oak tree with a half-rotted trunk usually leaned into the barbed wire fence, but the tree wasn't there. I remember gripping the steering wheel a little tighter and telling myself I must have been more tired than I thought. Still, when I crested a small rise, the headlights swept across something I had never seen before, a four-way intersection cutting through the middle of nowhere. There aren't supposed to be crossroads like that out there. The roads are mostly straight shots with T-junctions into ranch property, yet here it was, gravel and cracked blacktop meeting in a perfect X. Stop signs at each corner, though the red paint looked faded down to rust. The thing that chilled me wasn't the crossroads itself, but the way the other roads stretched out into darkness. They didn't look like they led to farms or barns or anything human. They just seemed to vanish, swallowed up by tree lines that were too thick for that part of the county. And the worst part was that when I glanced into the rearview mirror, the road I'd come down didn't look the same anymore. Instead of an open stretch fading back toward Caldwell, the tail of my headlights showed another black ribbon of road bending into unfamiliar woods. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe I'd gotten turned around, that there must have been more cut-through roads in the area than I realized. So I did what any sane person would. I stopped at the sign, rolled my window down, and listened. Nothing but cicadas and the faint whistle of wind. No cars, no dogs barking from farmhouses, no distant hum of highway traffic, just a silence that seemed to press in against the truck. My instinct told me to turn around right then, to retrace my path. But when I glanced back again, the way behind me seemed even darker, the trees pressing closer, the gravel shoulder narrow as if daring me to try. So I went straight. The road stretched out between fields of Johnson grass and mesquite, and for a while I thought maybe I'd just cut through to another county road. My GPS, though, had frozen. Little blue dot spinning, map refusing to load. After maybe 10 minutes, I came across another crossroads, identical to the first. Same faded stop signs, same asphalt cracked in a spiderweb pattern, same vanishing roads disappearing into black trees. I felt a chill work its way down my spine. I hadn't made any turns. There was no possible way to come up on the exact same intersection. I kept driving, telling myself I'd eventually hit a recognizable landmark, but 15 minutes later, the beams of my headlights revealed the same damn crossroads again. It was then that I noticed something else. Each time I reached the intersection, there was a shape in the ditch near the stop sign to the left. At first it looked like a trash bag or an old tire, but as I slowed it shifted. Just a twitch, like someone trying to lift their head. I mashed the gas and kept straight, heart hammering, and didn't dare look back. But the next time I hit the crossroads, The shape was closer, near the shoulder of the road, and I could see now it wasn't trash. It was a person, or something shaped like one. Thin, pale limbs, face shadowed under a mop of dark hair, clothes that looked soaked and heavy. When my headlights swept across it, it raised one arm like it was reaching for the hood. I drove on for what felt like an hour. Though the clock on my dash hadn't moved more than a few minutes, sweat clung to my back. Every time I thought about stopping, some gut-deep instinct screamed at me not to. The fourth time I rolled up on the crossroads, the figure was standing, dead center of the intersection, arms out at its sides like it was blocking me. I slammed the brakes, gravel spitting out from under the tires. For a moment, we just stared at each other. My headlights washed over its face, and I wished they hadn't. The skin sagged, waterlogged, eyes milky and wide like they'd been staring too long at the bottom of a pond. Its lips parted, and though I didn't hear sound, I felt the words echo in my head. You don't turn back. I don't remember making the choice, but I jerked the wheel hard right and tore off onto one of the side roads. The truck bounced over potholes, branches clawing at the sides, but I didn't care. All I knew was I couldn't face that thing again. The road twisted through thick woods that shouldn't exist in Burleson County. Trees leaned in, branches knitting overhead, blocking out the sky. The air grew damp and smelled of rot. I kept driving until I burst out into a clearing and saw another crossroads waiting for me, same as before. And in the middle of it, the figure stood again as if it had never moved. Something broke in me then. I spun the wheel around, praying I could retrace my path, but the woods had shifted. The road behind me was gone. There was only the intersection and the figure standing silent, waiting. I did the only thing left. I floored the gas and barreled straight toward it. The headlights flared across its pale face, and at the last moment before I hit, it vanished. The truck roared across the empty blacktop, and the next thing I knew, I was slamming on the brakes because my high beams had caught the reflective green sign of Highway 21. Just like that, I was back on the main road, the familiar stretch toward Bryan lit by streetlights in the distance. I pulled over, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The truck ticked as the engine cooled. Behind me, the county road lay quiet, nothing unusual about it. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I swore I saw something standing far back in the shadows where the pavement dipped. Just a hint of pale limbs, waiting. I drove the rest of the way home with every light on in the cab, and when I told my uncle about it the next day, he just nodded slowly and said I'd found the crossroads. He didn't ask which one. He just said the rule was simple. If you ever stumble on an intersection that wasn't there before, you turn back immediately. Because if you don't, the road you're on won't ever let you go the same way twice. And sometimes it won't let you go at all. I took the night route because the day crews kept getting turned around on the back roads and wasting diesel. My dispatcher in San Angelo said it like it was no big thing. Take a pallet of valves and belts out to the leases south of El Dorado, swing east through Menard County, cut down toward Junction if I had time, then up through Paint Rock and home before sunrise. It sounded easy on paper. I knew those roads. I knew them the way you know the bones in your hand. I grew up on them, counting fence posts, spotting hawks on the telephone lines, learning where the dips would fill with flash flood water after an hour of rain. My father worked the same route years back. Before he died, he told me not to run it at night. He said the lines on the map weren't the same after dark. He said that if I came to a crossroads I didn't recognize, I needed to turn back and take the long way. He said other things too, but he drank, and sometimes his warnings sounded like the kind of stories older men tell when they want to keep you home. The pallet was strapped in the bed of the company truck, and the August heat sat heavy on my shoulders even well after sunset. I took 277 down past Cristoval, where the river runs tight to the road and the water is always the color of a bottle held up to the light. Cicadas sang as loud as chainsaws. Every now and then the mesquite let off that tang like someone had poured diesel on damp wood. The sky was open and clean, the stars so thick you could pick out the dark lanes between them. I had the radio off to keep my head clear. The road turned and I turned with it, reflex more than thought. I passed a white wooden cross at a curve where an oil field hand went off the shoulder last year. The flowers in the coffee can had browned to straw. I touched 2 fingers to the brim of my cap without thinking. Old habits. I drove on. There is a point south of El Dorado where your headlights catch a line of wind-bent pecans, their limbs leaning over like old men listening. Beyond them is a field that looks like any other field, mesquite and prickly pear, a bit of low ground that holds damp longer than it should. When I was 12, my uncle told me about the lanterns that show up over that field. He said you could see them from the right angle, rows of soft lights bobbing a little as if someone were walking a slope. He said they looked like miners working, though there was never mining here. He said if you walked out toward them, they would fan out and then close in, and if you kept going, they would pass through you like weeds through a stock fence, leaving you cold for days. I never saw them as a kid. That night I saw them. They were a long way off when I first noticed them, a scatter of white like dew catching the light, but the dew would have been behind me. The road ran straight and my headlights didn't reach that far. The lights were moving, swaying. I let off the gas without meaning to. The truck coasted and the lanterns drifted across the field toward a line of posts. I could tell they were the same height off the ground. I could tell they had a rhythm like breath. I told myself it was men checking fence with headlamps or a ranch hand walking a line with the beam of his phone pointing down, but I knew how ridiculous that sounded. My uncle's voice rose through years like a bullfrog's call through tall grass. I pressed the gas and the truck responded, and for a moment the lights seemed to lift as if they would follow the road, but they didn't. They hung still, a neat line, and then winked out all at once. The field went back to being just a dark piece of earth. The pecans leaned the way they always had. I should have turned around then. I should have gone back to Cristobal, cut over to Mertzen, taken the long sweep through El Dorado, and met the highway again where I could see town lights. Instead, I told myself I had a job and there were men waiting on belts, and I drove on. A few miles past the pecans, I hit a patch of fog thick as cotton stuffing. A strange thing in August when the ground is baked white and the wind is a hairdryer. The fog was low, hugging the fields, and it thinned above the hood where the heat from the engine lifted it. I eased down, watched the white line, followed it like a taut string. The radio crackled without being on, and I heard a man's voice say my name. It didn't sound like my father. It sounded like a man speaking with his mouth pressed close to the microphone, like breath fogging the metal. I slapped the knob and the radio came to life with static and a faint country song, something old from the 70s with pedal steel and brush drums. The fog cleared and the road opened wide as if nothing had happened. I turned left at County Road 212, or at least the sign said it was 212. I hadn't taken that cut since last winter, but I remembered the turn because of the old stone church set back in a crown of live oaks. The roof had gone before I was born and the sanctuary had no doors. Kids from El Dorado would go there and spray paint each other's names on the one surviving wall. You could always hear wind in that spot, like a place where the land's breath rose to the surface. When my headlights touched the church, I saw a soft yellow inside the stones like a Sunday morning light. I slowed. Through the open arch where the door used to be, I saw a row of backs, men and women, shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed. Someone at the front was speaking. I couldn't hear the words, but I caught the cadence of a prayer. That would have been one thing if the church had a roof. It would have been another if I recognized anyone. I stopped the truck in the road and leaned forward on the wheel. A woman near the back turned around. Not a full turn, just enough that I saw the whiteness of her face. She raised a hand, palm toward me, the way you might sign to a child in church to be still. There were no taillights anywhere. No other cars. I put the truck in park and opened the door. Heat came out of the night in a wave. I let the dome light fade. The churchyard was full of dry leaves, not the season for it, and they lifted and settled like something asleep breathing. I took 2 steps crunching, then stopped. I could hear the man at the front now. He was praying in a Spanish that sounded like it had been taught to him by someone who didn't speak at first. He rolled the words like marbles carefully as if they would break. The woman watched me with no expression. Her eyes were very dark and caught no light. I said I was sorry. I said I didn't mean to interrupt. She lowered her hand without taking her eyes off me and pointed behind me. A short, stiff motion like someone indicating a fire. I turned and looked at the bed of my truck and saw a boy sitting on the pallet, his legs swinging as if a tailgate should be there. He wasn't there a moment before. He was maybe 12, with hair cut by someone who used kitchen scissors, wearing a shirt with the name of a team that didn't exist anymore. He was looking not at me but at the church, as if waiting on the amen. I took a step backward and my heel found something soft and I nearly went down. It was a pile of roadside flowers, The kind folks leave at curves where someone didn't make it. Only these were not at a curve and there was no cross. There were glass vases and a little stuffed bear that had been rained on and dried into a crust, and a candle in a jar with the wax pooled and hardened like a lily pad. I smelled a sweetness undercut with mold. The boy swung his feet as if to a song he remembered from a long time ago. The woman turned back to the front and I heard the man say something about the souls that wander, the travelers who do not see where they are going, the ones who take something that doesn't belong to them. I didn't take anything. I wanted to say it, but my mouth felt full of pennies. The boy climbed down off the pallet without using his hands and walked past me into the church. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anything. He moved like a kid on punishment who knows where to stand. I backed toward the truck door and kept backing until my calves touched the running board. I got in and set the brake and eased the door shut. The church light dimmed as if a cloud passed, but the sky was clear. I saw a motion in the mirror and turned my head to check the back seat, even though the truck didn't have one. Old habit from my father's stories. He used to say that if someone pointed at the back seat, you had better check it. I clicked the seatbelt and let the engine idle for a count of 10. When I rolled forward, the yellow inside the stones went out and the building was a ruin again. I didn't breathe right until the oaks gave way to barbed wire and the road narrowed and ran south. Every 10 miles I saw something that didn't belong. A row of red brake lights far ahead that never got closer no matter how long I drove. A farmhouse porch lit up with a circle of people sitting in lawn chairs, even though there was no driveway or split in the fence for a gate. A pickup pulled onto the shoulder with the driver's door open and no one inside. The engine idling with that huffing sound old Fords make when the timing is off. I passed a school bus stopped at a crossing in the middle of nowhere. No railroad, no road to cross, just prairie on all sides. The stop sign on the bus swung back and forth in the wind. The fog returned in patches, dry fog like flour, leaving my arms powdered when I brushed it off the door. I came to a crossroads where the blacktop went bad and the county hadn't bothered to fix it. The sign on the left said County Road 531, which would have been impossible where I was, but sometimes numbers get repeated across county lines. The sign on the right was shot through and the holes made the word look like lace. Straight ahead, the road narrowed to one lane. The tar sprayed heavy and pebbles loose on top. The kind of section they do when they know it will wash out and they don't want to waste money. I knew to turn left. My father's voice had that tired tone he used when he had already told me something twice. The wind pushed the grasses in a long sigh and something whistled across the fence wire. The sound carried a note that made the inside of my teeth ache. I turned left and the truck fought me. The steering wheel tugged against my palms. The way a horse will bring its head up if it sees something you don't. The lane ahead would have carried me straight into a low hollow where the road disappears. I didn't want to know what sat down there. I took the left. The left should have taken me toward a low water crossing with a concrete lip and a hand-painted sign warning about depth. Instead, I came up on a fence line decorated with tiny white shoes. Baby shoes, toddler shoes, a few that looked like they might fit a second grader. They were laced to the wire at the toes, pointing toward the road. They were all clean, like they'd never met dirt. I stopped without meaning to and rolled forward slow, letting my headlights swing across the glitter of their buckles. I saw a small figure standing in the ditch. When I lifted my foot to brake, I had a jolt of memory like a smack. My uncle had told me there were places you didn't stop. No matter what you thought you saw, I didn't stop. I passed the shoes and the figure and kept rolling even when something small struck the passenger door. A sound like corn thrown against tin. The cloud cover moved in from the west. The stars went behind a pale sail and the air cooled in a way that didn't match the season. I clicked on the defrost to keep the windshield clear. The radio had fallen into those same two songs, a thin transmission that sounded as if it had been recorded on a kitchen table. Between the songs came a game, the announcer calling the names of players I remembered from my father's baseball cards. He wasn't a man given to saving much, but he loved those cards. He'd have me pick out a player and tell him the stats, run my finger down that stiff paper and lift the numbers to my mouth and speak them. The announcer called out a home run and the crowd sound rose thin and distant like wind in a long pipe. I tried another station. They were the same. It occurred to me to turn the radio off and leave it off, and I did. I delivered the first crate of belts in a yard of pump jacks that moved slow like cattle knotting. The leaseman took the crate with both hands and thanked me without looking at my face. He asked if I had seen anything on the way in, and I told him the church had people in it again. He took a step back and his boots made a dry noise in the dust. He told me to leave the rest of the order and go by the north road. He said the south road was not for me after dark. He handed me a folded paper towel with a bit of salt in it and told me to put it in my pocket and not to taste it. That was the way he said it. Not to taste it. I said sure and did what he asked. He didn't offer coffee and I didn't ask. On the north road I met a funeral procession that moved without sound. There were cars from a dozen years lined up in order, the oldest in front. A black Packard with white ribbons glanced in my beams and the chrome spears threw darts of light across the mesquite. Behind it, a powder blue Chevy with a spare tire on the back lip. Behind that, an Oldsmobile my father would have loved. There were faces in the windows looking straight ahead with a focus that made my neck prickle. I pulled onto the shoulder the way you do and tipped my cap. The procession passed with no dust raised, as if the tires weren't touching the road. At the end came a hearse that was nothing but shadow inside, and though the glass was clear, I could not see a shape. The cars turned right onto a lane that went nowhere. I kept driving because there is not much else to do when the night has settled into your joints and your hands remember what forward feels like. I passed a diner that ought not to have been there, a long, low building with a neon coffee cup and a sign that said always open. The parking lot was gravel that looked raked. A waitress I knew from Junction stood behind the glass door and smiled at me in a way that asked me to come in. Her hand set a coffee cup on a counter where I could not quite see it. My truck rolled a few yards past before I understood what I was seeing. There would be a coffee stain on the saucer from where she set the cup down to show me. I pressed the brake and then eased off and let the road pull me back to speed. My father had a story about a place like that. He pocketed a sugar packet once, he said, and woke up 20 miles away with the packet emptier than he left it. His mouth full of sweetness he did not put there. I passed the diner and the neon blinked and the building went unlit. The night lengthened like a rope unwinding. I saw women standing in the grass with their hair lying flat against their heads as if the wind had combed it. I saw a set of headlights behind me that never grew or shrank, just a steady pair that kept me honest. At a rest pull-off cut from the limestone, I saw an old sheriff's car with a star on the door, and no one in the driver's seat, the lights on top spinning with no siren. My eyes burned and felt gritty, and my mouth tasted like old coins from the radio's breath. The salt packet thumped against my thigh every time I hit a patched place, and for a while I drove holding it. The paper towel had wicked some sweat from my palm, and the salt made a small hard lump. It comforted me the way a smooth stone might comfort a child. I kept my eyes on the white line and followed it north. Near Paint Rock, the road does a gentle rise and then a long glide. There is a low iron bridge in a bend where the river is lazy and full of gar and turtles. I saw a woman standing on the bridge rail. She raised her arm and pointed, not at the river but at the bench seat next to me that wasn't there. I knew better than to look. I looked anyway. The seat was empty, but the leather had a depression as if someone had shifted their weight. The depression disappeared as quickly as I saw it, like a state line passed its speed. The woman lowered her arm and stepped backward into nothing. The river kept being a river. At the last lease on my run, the gate chain had been looped and not locked, which meant somebody was expected, or somebody had already gone in and would be right back. I unlooped the chain and eased through and set the pallets where the foreman's note told me to. The sky in the east had the faintest hint of milk. There were birds I couldn't see, only hear. A thin chipping sound. I shut the tailgate that wasn't down and a tool clattered somewhere. The sound of a ratchet rolling across metal. I stood still and listened, and the sound did not come again. I got in the truck and set my hands on the wheel and looked at them like they belonged to someone older. The salt packet in my pocket had warmed with my body heat. I took it out and set it on the dash and watched it as if it could move. On the way back, a dog ran in the ditch, then ahead of me for a stretch, then cut across the road without looking. He was a salt and pepper healer, patch over his left eye, ears torn from barbed wire or fights. I had seen him before somewhere, or one that looked like him. He kept a pace I didn't think possible, held it mile after mile with his tongue out and his breath hauling. The sun raised a pale line behind the hills and the fog lifted from the fields as if drawn on a string. When the dog finally broke off and ran through a gap in the fence, I slowed and watched him enter a field that wasn't a field at all, but an old roadbed, sunken, a trace left from a time when the road ran a different way. He trotted into it and disappeared like a fish finding deep water. I passed the pecans again and looked for the lanterns and saw nothing but air. The church sat like a box of bones, and the leaves in the yard were the right season again. The diner's lot was a rectangle of weeds. The sheriff's car was where it always was in the museum on the courthouse square, a relic. I told myself I had driven too long and had stacked wrong thoughts on top of tired eyes. Then I reached into my pocket for the salt and found a bell. It was a small brass service bell like the kind they put on counters in old country stores. It fit my hand like it had been poured into it. The top was smooth from years of fingers. When I pressed the plunger, it made no sound. I wiped it on my jeans and turned it over and read the engraving done in hand-cut letters. The name didn't ring any bells in my head, no pun intended. I knew the county and the town and the street from the letters, from the way a local would carve them with care, but I could not place the store. I set the bell on the seat that wasn't a seat and it stayed. I drove with it beside me like a passenger, the sun climbing and the heat returning and the sound of normal birds back in the trees where they should be. At the yard in San Angelo, my dispatcher looked at me and then looked at the bell and then looked back at me. He asked where I had been because I had a half tank less fuel than the miles should account for. I shrugged. I told him I took a turn I shouldn't have and it took me around. He picked up the bell and pressed the plunger and it rang with a small clear sound that made the hairs on my arm stand. He said he hadn't heard that sound since he was a kid. He said his mother would send him to the store with a note and $3 and he would smack that bell with his hand for the joy of it. He set it down like it might crack. I took the bell home and put it on my kitchen table and it looked wrong there. It looked like it wanted to be somewhere with a counter and a glass jar of pickles and a cooler humming near the door. I thought about putting it in a box and mailing it to an address I wasn't sure existed. Instead, I drove back the next night earlier while there was still color in the sky. The pecans leaned. The field held what it held. The church stones glowed pink and then gray. I crossed the bridge and no one stood on it. The diner lot was weeds and ruts. The sheriff's car was safe in the museum behind glass and the lights didn't turn. The crossroads where I took the left had 2 signs now. Both knew the numbers correct. I parked under the oaks and opened the door to the ruin and walked to the front where the altar used to be. The floor was cracked concrete and someone had painted a heart around a set of initials that didn't belong together anymore. I set the bell where it felt right and stepped back. A wind came through the building with no roof and made the live oaks answer one another for a while. I listened for a prayer and heard only the insects tuning up for the night. The sun slid down and the shadow of the arch across the floor stretched long and then went away. When I walked back to the truck, the passenger door had a dent near the bottom I hadn't seen before, as if a handful of small stones had hit it all at once. I touched the dent and felt the shape of kernels under metal. I drove home on the main highway with the other men who had to be up early, and when I slept, I dreamed of a line of lights moving in a field and of the way they went out like someone pinched them. I do the route in daylight now when I can. The company changed my shifts and the new kid takes the night run, and I told him to keep to the main lanes. He smiled the way young men smile when they don't want to show they're afraid of something. I keep salt in my pocket anyway. I don't taste it. Old habits. Sometimes I hear a bell in the distance when I'm crossing a county line. Sometimes I catch a game on the radio with names I know from cardboard. Sometimes I pull onto the shoulder and let a procession pass. The air cool around me even when the sun could fry an egg on the hood. Texas is wide enough to hold the living and the other kind, and the roads find a way to fit them both. I tell myself you only see what you bring with you. Then I look at the dent in the passenger door where the kernels hit and know better. It is easy to get lost out there. You don't need a wrong sign to do it. The land is like a sleeping animal with a hiding place under every fold of skin. The best advice I can give you is the advice my father gave me, which I ignored the first night and have tried not to ignore since. If you come to a crossroads you don't recognize, turn back. If someone points to the seat beside you, check it once and then keep your eyes forward. If you see a light where there should not be light, remember your own name and hold on to it. And if you take anything that doesn't belong to you, even by accident, be ready to give it back. The roads are old and long and they remember. They don't mind waiting.